Hello, everyone. I understand it's 10 o'clock, so we shall make a start. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cambridgeshire County Council Strategy and Resources Committee. Apologies, you have to deal with me today. So, be nice to me. I have a few new members to welcome. I understand Councillors Corney, Goff, and Sharp. Welcome to this committee. We allow filming and photography at these public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet if you like. But please do have your mobiles on silent or vibrate while we have the meeting. We are live streaming this, and we will have a recording available after the meeting. I understand we have brought forward the fire alarm for today, so it's already happened. So we should not have any further fire alarm. So if you hear anything, run. I think that's mostly where we are. So item 2 on the agenda, Michelle, are we ready for that? Oh, item 1, so sorry. Notification of chair and vice chair of this committee. So the chair of this committee is Councillor Lucy Netzinger, who's given her apologies today, and the vice chair is me. So these appointments were made by full council, and we have to note them for the minutes. Item 2 is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Netzinger, and Councillor Maria King is substituting. And I believe Councillor King needs to leave at 1 o'clock. And Councillor Hay is substituting for Councillor Mark Goldsack.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michelle. In terms of declarations of interest under this item as well, does anybody have any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest on any item on the agenda today? Nothing. Thank you very much. If anything occurs to you later on the agenda, please signal it at that point. Item 3, minutes. We are being asked to approve the minutes of the Strategy and Resources Committee of the meeting of the 29th of March. Does any member disagree with those minutes being an accurate record of the meeting? Nothing, so we will take those as approved. Thank you very much. We also have, so we've approved the minutes. We also carry an option log on those minutes. So the actions are all marked as complete. Does anybody have any comments on the actions of the action log? Councillor Howitt.
Firstly, good morning, everyone. Just a point on the action log to do with the joint administration agreement action track. I have talked in advance to Tom Kelly, so he's aware that this question is coming. But one of the areas where we would like to see progress is on the whole issue of bringing back some more services. I emphasise some more services in-house. And I wanted to ask him today what progress there is on that, and he foresees. He gave me a very helpful private call about this in terms of the council's commissioning role in the different directorates, and I thought that would be useful to air amongst the wider members of the committee. And Chair, I'd just accentuate that I think according to Public Finance, 73% of councils are currently engaging in insourcing actions. 45% have already completed insourcing actions, and Deloitte have produced some very interesting evidence that the complexity involved in outsourcing sometimes outweighs in terms of cost and efficiency, bringing services back in-house. So this is by no means a fringe interest for us, and that organisations like the Association for Public Service Excellence have done some really interesting work on this that we can lean on. So it is an important part of the joint administration agreement, and I just wanted to ask the Chief Financial Officer what progress there is, but perhaps most importantly, how we will progress future actions on this issue in the context of the action log.
Thank you, Richard. Tom, do you have any comments?
I'd like to thank Councillor Howard for his comments and giving me notice of this as well. So we're coming up to quite an important point in the commissioning cycle for a number of services, particularly where there's been extensions of contracts through the pandemic. And the council has already introduced some a kind of pre-procurement pro forma that considers this matter in particular, and will be bringing that into the Cambridgeshire focused procurement governance board, which is to be established very shortly, just ahead of the summer. And this will be an active area of consideration. In addition to that, Councillor Howard will know that our largest area of external spend is in people and communities as a social care authority. And there's some focused work in that area to bring forward some support from consultancy to look at opportunities that there may be coming forward. And I think we look at a number of our budget challenges in that area and can see that particularly where there are new initiatives emerging from government, or where we're facing significant market pressures and market challenges, that having a mixed economy of supply is important. So this is an important area of work, and one that I know the procurement governance group that's going to be established shortly will take forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom. Does anybody else? Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering about the appropriateness of just what has happened just now, because we're on the action log, which is where the question was raised. The action log is about the shared services, which is presented at this meeting, which is agenda item 9. The response in the action log is we're going to talk about shared services at action point number 9. Councillor Howard appears to have asked a much broader question about other things. It almost seems like a pre-prepared policy announcement by the joint administration about something we're unaware of that's going to go ahead, that's been decided, that hasn't gone to this committee. The only point in here is about the shared services, and that is covered by the paper later on. So it just seems to me like an inappropriate use of this meeting.
Thank you, Steve. That point is noted. We do have insourcing as a point in the joint administration agreement, but I don't worry, you're not being asked to take any decisions on anything. And if that ever happens, it will come forward in its proper agenda item. Thank you. I should stop turning that off. Action log is now completed, which means we are moving on to petitions and public questions, on which I am aware there are none, which means we move swiftly on to agenda item number 5. Do we have Amanda on the line to introduce this? If we don't, does anybody else want to introduce it? Are we early? I mean, it's only number 5.
She was online on our screens about 5 minutes ago, just before the meeting started. So I think she has logged in.
All right, okay.
Might be an IT issue.
Maybe there are some issues. Does anybody want to?
I am here. I'm lurking on Zoom if anybody can see or hear me.
Oh, we can hear you, but we can't see you. Hello, Amanda. Good to not see you. Sorry.
My video has been disabled by someone, but I am definitely here. So I'll start talking and maybe I will appear at some point. So I'll start by saying I'm really sorry I can't be there in person this morning. And I'm calling in my mobile. My Wi-Fi seems stable at the moment, but excuse me if we get any freezes. And I'm here to present the decentralization paper, which you'll all have in front of you. You'll know that this decentralization agenda item has been discussed and considered at the COSMIC committee, the Communities and Social Mobility Committee. Over the last year, there's been quite a few discussions about it in that committee. And one of the recommendations from those discussions was to bring a paper to this committee setting out the principles of decentralization. And the reason that that recommendation was made is because it's the role of the Strategy and Resources Committee to determine the policy framework for the Council, including consideration of how decentralisation fits with other priorities and policies. So as described in section 2.1, this policy framework then helps us to design and deliver our services in the future. Decentralisation is an approach and a way of thinking, and in this council, we always start from the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So you'll see in 2.2 that our overarching aim is that Cambridgeshire residents and communities are empowered to direct a just transition to the safe and just space on their own terms. So there's quite a lot to unpick in that high-level outcome, and I hope that the principles that are described in 2.3 and then the examples that follow in section 3 help to do that. You'll see from those examples in section 3 that we're already moving to new models underpinned by the principles of decentralisation in many areas of the council. And we've shifted our approach really significantly in some areas already. Alongside this, though, we want to establish some new additional pilot work, which is described in section 4. It's important that the pilots are purposeful and that they help us to test the principles of decentralisation so that we're confident that changes in approach and delivery in other areas of the council will help to deliver the outcomes we're trying to achieve. If the committee supports the principles of decentralisation, we'll develop these pilot ideas into full proposals, and I'll come back to this committee with a clear action plan and a framework for assessing the impact of and learning from these pilots. Sorry, I'm getting a message flashing up. Hey, there I am. Good morning. In section 6, I'm recommending a systematic programme of engagement with partners and communities. A decentralised approach can't be designed entirely from the centre. The chair of the Cosmic Committee, Councillor Sanderson, has already started the engagement work with district, parish and town councils, and will build on that work to co-design the pilot projects with partners. So I'm asking the committee to agree the policy framework and the design principles for decentralisation and to endorse the next steps and pilot approach laid out in section 4. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. We're very grateful you took the time to present this for us today. Before we move to the debate, I understand that there is an amendment to the recommendations. Steve, would you like to move it now?
If possible, Chair, I'd like to ask a question before we move to the vote.
Of course, yes, no, do please.
And it's not a question of officers. It's a question for the joint administration, and perhaps you're best able to answer this. So as Amanda said, in 2.2, what it actually means is Cambridgeshire residents and communities are empowered to direct a just transition to the safe and just space on their own terms. And it seems to a certain extent like I'd welcome that if I really understood it a bit better. And as Amanda Askham said repeatedly through her opening things, we hope that this explains things and we hope this means something. And I was wondering if the joint administration through you could really explain to me in quite simple terms what you mean by decentralisation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I mean, I can say something general about it at this point. Does anybody else want to come in before I do so? If not, then, you know, I think if you'll allow me, the point of this paper today is exactly to answer that question. We were going to present today an in-principle approach to what we mean by decentralization and a strategy on how to test it and make sure that it works. Detailed proposals of what exactly we will do in practice are going to follow. But the idea is that we do need to bring, I mean, in the simplest terms in which I can explain it, we need to bring decision-making closer to the communities that are affected by it. That's the whole point of it. That's what we're trying to do. And obviously, as you know, because this is the simple idea, it does leave the question open as to how exactly you're going to do that. And this is something that we are going to bring more details on as soon as possible. But we have an overarching policy situation as set out in the paper. And we will test it by means of some pilots. And we would like the committee's agreement that this strategy is good to go, so we can do some more detailed work. So that's how I would answer your question, Steve. Does anybody else have any comments? Yes, Other Steve.
Thank you, Chair. As you will know, because you were a valued member of the committee under the Conservative administration, pre-May 21, the administration had been steering the council in this direction in a well-planned way for a considerable amount of time. The move from Shire Hall to this much smaller building that we sit in today, and the dissemination of officers across the county closer to the people that we serve, the wider use of libraries and community hubs, for example. The introduction of the Think Communities as a concept and a way of working with our partners, the introduction of a Think Communities team and funding to increase community resilience. Then followed the community coordinators and connectors as we introduced place-based working. Having consulted health colleagues and town and parish councils at 2 annual conferences, we identified 22 place-based localities covering the whole county, informed by primary care networks and the appropriate size for the proposed new social care model. Most of the paper we have before us today could have actually been written by Adrian Chapman 18 months ago. Introductory events were planned to take place at all 22 localities last summer. By now, much of the detail in this report would have been worked through at a local level, and we would have had the feedback and learning by now. Unfortunately, progress was halted last May. Nothing has happened since. And over a year on, we have a paper really that just tells us we need to wait until September. The paper mentions transferring the funding and power and consistent methodology. But Chair, like Steve, I'd just like to pin you down really on what the structure and methodology you are envisaging and the governance model would allow this to happen. You mentioned joint area committees as in the city. Are you thinking of introducing joint area committees across the county? Because that's the sort of information we need if we're going to take this forward and assess how effective it could be. So just some more information from you, Chair, if I may, as you know, from the joint administration's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I will come back to those points, but before I do so, Edna, would you like to say something now?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I was going to actually congratulate the officer on this report. It is a complex business, as Amanda said, to unpick the concepts. And I think if you have a thoughtful approach, you soon realize, and it's illustrated in this paper very well, with all the different examples and the different ideas that could flow from that simple concept. Progressing from the vision and set of priorities we had initially to a strategic framework, going stepwise through to the principles of decentralization, as I say, laid out very clearly here. It does incorporate a wide range of concepts. It's completely unexceptional in a way, but it's not the limited approach that was in place before. It's much more open, and it is open to new ideas and making the exact form of decentralization match the need of the local circumstances. So whether it's decentralization of decision making, or it's more engagement of residents into service design or localization of delivery, these are all broad concepts within a decentralization scheme. And I'm very excited by the paper. Thank you.
Richard, did you want to say something that is about what Steve Criswell just talked about? Because otherwise we can, yes, go on then.
I'm happy to make a comment of that as well as my general comments, if that's what you wish. Firstly, just transition to a safe and just space to Councillor Cohen. Well, Just Transition's got a very specific meaning. It comes from the UN. We all know there's massive transformation going on in society, driven by climate change and other factors, and that has social consequences to it, and that countries around the world have committed themselves to managing that process so that social injustices don't take place. And our commitment to that must be to our residents in Cambridgeshire. The idea of a safe and just space, I think safe speaks for itself, and all the issues of people's security in communities in which they live. But a just space accepts that there are inequalities and discrimination within our communities, as there are more widely in society, and that we want to work to create more just spaces within our county. I hope those concepts are not just understood but broadly agreed between opposition and administration, and I suspect perhaps with further discussion they may be. I certainly hope that will be the case. I also welcome what Councillor Criswell said in his contribution. I do respectfully disagree that anything's been put on hold. I think a lot has happened in the last year, not least under Tom Sanderson and the Cosmic Committee, with their very active programmes. But I think your commitment to local offices, to think communities and to place-based working, if we can establish some cross council support for that and how we do it, I welcome that, and I hope that we can work with him and other members of the opposition on that. But coming from as chair of Adults and Health, one of the issues about the ICS and neighbourhood-based working is that the aspiration is there, but it's in a silo. And if we talk to our health partners, they wouldn't have the first idea of what we're doing in highways, what we're doing in Cosmic and so on, because they're so narrowly looking down the lens of what we're doing between health and social care, and understandably so. I don't criticise them for that. But that's also true in other aspects of what the council does. We think communities is great, but they are navigators. And too much of the rest of the council is too much centrally driven and very much distinct from each other, rather than working in a interdepartmental, interdirectorate, cooperative way at the local level, and trying to make our services more understandable, more accessible to residents, and trying to ensure that people don't feel they have to go to 15 different people before they get the answer to what they want, and that we're cooperating all with each other. And I think that's a big difference in what we're trying to do, where we hope for the opposition's support. And because we've not produced a structure, you asked for a structure and a methodology, that is an indication, not that we've got some secret plan or we haven't got a plan, but it's how we want to develop this. We want this very much not to be just about the relationship with our district council friends and the parish councils. We want it to be very much with communities, with formal voluntary and community sector groups, and with the principles of deliberative democracy, with citizens and citizen interests, and that we're going to do it by learning by doing, having some pilots and progressing, rather than having a single blueprint and just trying to impose it. And we ask for your support and understanding in relation to that. I do commend the officers for 2.1 and the different principles in that section around social and environmental impact of what we do. I think some of that would seem quite theoretical, I think, to some of our staff and some of our service users, but each of those ideas in section 2.1 are consistent with each other and reflect a commitment to take decisions around social and environmental impact, as well as around financial impact. And I very much welcome that indeed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Richard. There are more people wanting to come in, so I will bring people in just a moment. I just wanted to say to Steve, thank you for the question. And in terms of that, it's broader than that, because if it was just we're going to bring a bunch of area committees, the paper would have said we're going to bring a bunch of area committees. It's not true decentralization if it's not co-designed. So this is what we're saying. We're going to go out there and co-design it with the endorsement of this committee, including a bunch of pilots, which are going to be a sort of first shot at it to see how it works. Area committees are one way in which we can do it, but it's certainly not the only way, because if it was, that's what the paper would say. Now, I had Lorna and Tom and then Sam. Lorna, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to firstly thank Councillor Count for homing in on the key sentence in the report. So that's good. Less good that he doesn't really feel clear about it, but I hope he will become clearer as the debate goes on. I think my issue with what Councillor Criswell said is that this is not about us trying to catch up with delivering the Conservative agenda of 4 years ago. That's not what this paper is about. This paper is about delivering the Joint Administration's agenda for real decentralisation in Cambridgeshire. And there are 4 particular components to the sentence that I wanted to pull out. The first one is about residents and communities being empowered. It's not about sitting on top of everything in Cambridgeshire and going, right, okay, we'll do it this way. It's about empowering people, residents and communities to do things and take a measure of control over what happens and the decisions that are made in their area. Councillor Howitt has explained the just transition, and that is a well-recognised phrase and a well-recognised concept. The safe and just space is actually, I assume that Councillor Count has either read the book Donut Economics by Kate Rayworth, or at the very least watched the YouTube videos. The safe and just space for humanity is a key concept in that economic outlook, which is one that's increasingly being adopted, and one which is part of the thinking that is listed in this report. It's an excellent read and a really key way of re-envisaging economics to create the safe and just space for humanity. So I do recommend that to him, and that may clarify to Councillor Count, and that may clarify his thinking. And then the key phrase at the very end, on their own terms. Not every community is alike. Not every community will want the same things. Not every community will want things done and delivered in the same way. And the on their own terms is part of the crucial difference in this. So I'm really grateful that we started at the very beginning of this debate by homing in on such a very key sentence. And I very much hope that as the debate goes along today and going forward, that the members opposite will actually understand those concepts and get on board with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. Tom?
Thank you, Chair. I think some very good comments preceded me on this, and I don't intend to just go over them again, but I think the key thing here is that there's considerably more to this, and there will be more to this than we've just seen in the past. Previous administration did do some very good work in this area under Steve's chairmanship and Adrian Chapman and others. But I think we need to take this a step further. As you said, Chair, co-design has got to be important, not just a case of us offloading things to our district and parish colleagues. We'll obviously have to consult with them. Again, we do talk to them on a pretty regular basis as well. I think the pilots are going to be very interesting. They'll give us a flavour of how things progress. And we've obviously identified the local highway improvement scheme, which I think actually does work quite well. And that does help to empower our communities, but we need to expand on that. And as Councillor Dupre said, this will mean different things for different parts of our county. So I'm quite excited about this. I'm looking forward to working with all colleagues, both here and at COSMIC, to develop this further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Sam, did you want to come in now?
Yeah, thank you. It was just about a couple of things, really. So firstly, in the paper, it talks about it being bottom up, which I really agree with, but then I don't feel that the paper is actually a bottom up approach. I think local people obviously should make local decisions and know their areas best, but the fact that we're making a strategy feels very much to me this is a top down approach. If we really wanted it to be bottom up, we could have, and I did say this some months ago, we could have given money directly to town and parish councils that were interested. I understand that perhaps some are perhaps less able or less willing than others, but we could have given them money and asked them to get on with the projects and start working and with our support. And I think what frustrates me as well is this doesn't actually recognise what local people are actually doing and local town and parish councils. For example, in Wisbech, our mayor is raising money for a young people's counselling service, a building that's just opened, funded, built by local builders and local people that have donated, being run purely by donations. Again, that's something the NHS should be funding, and it's not, it's local people. The number 68 bus, CPCA should be funding it. Again, it's left to local people trying to get funding, trying to advertise it at timetables, trying to get uptake. So local people are doing a lot of stuff locally already. And it's very frustrating that we're then kind of told, well, actually, no, we're going to come along and we're going to spend some money of your taxes that we could actually use just giving it to you directly or helping you. We're going to use that money and design a service and tell you how you should, live your lives and what you need to do. I'm a big advocate of saying, let's not do another strategy or spend another load of money on officers writing more papers. Let's actually do some real action. And the other thing I took a little bit of exception to was on page 19, I believe it is, it mentions Wisbech Town Council saying that they've been involved in the consultation and are keen on the project. I think that's been quite economical, really, with the reality of what happened, because I was at that meeting. It was myself, our town clerk, Councillor Sanderson, and the clerk from Huntingdon. And mostly the meeting was dominated by talking about cemeteries and ground maintenance and how Wisbech Town Council could run that. As I said in the meeting, that is not a county council service, that is run by the district council. And we are actually very happy with the service that FTC provide on that. I'm not unhappy with that at all. So I don't understand why we would be given a service that the county has got absolutely no power to run. In the first place, we wouldn't be able to, even if you wanted to. And even if you did want to, we're quite happy. So I think there's maybe a little bit of a lack of understanding of how different areas work. I know people have mentioned the joint committees. Perhaps in Cambridge City, they work very well. I couldn't comment because I haven't seen them. But I think that perhaps because there aren't any, similar to Peterborough, there aren't sort of the parishes that there are in the city council. Perhaps that's why they work so well. Whereas in districts with your parish councils and your town councils, I'm not sure they would work as well because people wouldn't be as well represented. So I'm pleased to know that they aren't going to be rolled out everywhere. Thank you.
Not without significant desire from that side. Effectively, that's the idea. Chris, did you want to come in now?
Thank you, Chair. Here we are. In 6 weeks' time, this administration will be a third of the way through its term of office. And we're presented with this paper. And this paper is, putting it kindly, incomplete. It actually states, we'll see some details about what's actually involved in this in 3 months' time. And in terms of moving forwards, the pace of progress really clearly has been sclerotic. I have to congratulate Amanda for writing this paper in the way she did. I know they say it's not possible to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, but Amanda's come very close to doing it. So I do congratulate Amanda for the technical way in which she's put this paper together. In paragraph 6.2 of the report, we are told that the chair of the Cosmic Committee had met with officers and members from districts and from the City Council last autumn, and that there had been support in principle for the approach to decentralizing decision-making from each discussion. Well, certainly as far as Finland is concerned, I know that in the conversations that I had with the Chief Executive and with Councillor Sanderson, what we emphasized was our support, our very strong support for the principle of subsidiarity. Now, decentralization in itself actually is a quite technical term, merely relating to where some decisions are made, whether you have a central place where certain decisions are made, or whether you have a more diffuse way of making decisions. Whereas the setting of policies and making decisions which can affect the way in which real decisions are made in terms of service provision, that is a separate matter. So if decentralization merely means diffusing the way in which policies are carried out, it's nowhere near as strong as a principle of subsidiarity. And I'm sorry to use a word which Councillor Hewitt will be more than familiar with over the years that he spent in Europe. I know it's a technical word, but it's a very good word to describe a particular philosophy. And I don't see decentralization running through this paper. Now, I have to admit, I have to wait until September to see what's really behind this. But I'm concerned that what we're seeing here is not the real possibility of local decision-making taking place at a local level, which produces different results on a policy level in different areas of the county to reflect the different opinions and desires and needs of different local communities. I'm not seeing that yet, and that does worry me a lot. But I would ask Councillor Sanderson if he'd be kind enough just to confirm, because it's not been written in here in paragraph 6.2, that it was subsidiarity that we in Finland were asking for, and we still do ask if that can be a more fundamental part of what is going to be coming forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Very briefly, Tom, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bain, for your question. Happy to develop that further. You did mention that at some length at our meeting, but I think that wasn't mentioned by any of the other areas, parts of the county. So I think it just emphasises the point that there'll have to be different approaches in different areas, but I'm happy to develop that further with you. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I was just going to say, I'm very aware that Amanda's listening to this very intently. And if this was useful before we stop claiming your time on today of all days, if there was anything else you wanted to add, any questions you heard that you think you can answer that we haven't yet.
Yes, thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you for letting me come back in on this. I think it is a really good and useful debate, and we have to get into the sort of guts of what we all mean by this. I do think, just coming back to a few things, so this isn't about writing a top-down strategy, definitely not. And I think in section 4, I've tried to say in there, the next steps are very much about talking closely with our partners and communities, absolutely to co-design those things, absolutely, as Sam says, to make sure that the money and the choice and the power sits in the right place. And I think the other thing I would come back on is say, when I was writing this paper, there were so many examples of great things that are going on in communities. So back to Councillor Hoy's point, I'm sorry that they are not, I couldn't mention all of them, I just drew out one or two. And I think it is a really important point that we mustn't have a centralised approach to decentralisation. So it absolutely is about those next steps, about looking at the differences between how different areas want to make decisions and how we can support that accountability at a local area. So I think it's been a really helpful discussion for me, and we'll make sure that those things are stronger and reflected in the next iteration of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Now, before we do have the sort of main debate on this paper, would we want to do the amendment now? Would that be a good time? Thank you. I believe you. Hello.
Point of order. I think you need to move the recommendations in order that there can be an amendment to it, or am I incorrect on that?
Sorry, in the Constitution, the recommendations are taken as moved by the officers when they introduce the report, so you're fine.
I mean, I really don't mind when we do it. I'm just trying to be orderly in my head. Steve, would you like to go ahead now?
Thank you, Chair. And actually, the responses to my simple question, what does it actually mean, will help play into the to my thinking on this subject. Because it was, I felt, very, very simple question. What does the joint administration mean by this paper? And what we got was a lot of speakers on this, mainly telling me what it didn't mean, a lot of floundering on what it told me what it did mean, but some overlying principles that took 13 months to deliver to actually, in my opinion, get us nowhere. So we aren't actually very far ahead with this. We've ruled out offloading decisions to parishes and districts. That was Tom. Lorna hoped that I could understand from the answers I was given what it actually meant. I'm asking it on behalf of the public, some of you are viewing, and I can assure you that I'm pretty certain they'll be seeing a lot of floundering going on today, because I'm no further forward, except for the basic tenet that you started off with, that you want, as Elisa and Richard, Councillors Machini and Howitt, decentralised democratic decision-making and delivery at a local area. Well, if you're ruling out current structures, you have to have new structures. So I'm not sure that Cambridgeshire are ready for another layer of bureaucracy on its decision-making, because decisions have been ruled out as being made here. They've been ruled out as being made by the parishes and the districts. So they've got to be made somewhere else. So just like joint area committees, we're going to have another layer of bureaucracy, although quite different in each and every area. So that should be nice and easy to manage. And I like other people, I must congratulate Amanda for doing well, because I've never seen anybody attempt to knit fog before, but this comes pretty close. So where are we going to go with this paper? And based on what I've heard today, it reinforces my belief in the two amendments that I'm putting forward. So the first is, I don't believe there's any finances associated with this. And the reason there aren't any finances associated with this is because it's not quite ready. You need to get some pilots together. It's outlined in the paper that we will think about what we're going to do, and then we'll ask some money to do this. And because you've got nowhere in 13 months, if you think this is a winning horse, I'm asking you to back it. And I've discussed the actual amount of resource necessary. Amanda asked them, and we've come up with a figure that a team costing 400,000 a year for 3 years will help to actually accelerate this, because I'm not opposed to the principle. But I actually think that you're getting nowhere. And a lot of the actual principle work was what we were doing in the previous Conservative regime. So the first amendment is actually, if this is a winning strategy, start backing it. The second is, as I've quite simply outlined today, you actually struggle to know what it is that you mean. And Amanda very helpfully at the outset said that we are an outcome-focused organisation, and this is designed to deliver some better outcomes. So the second amendment is about some measurables. What are you going to measure to know that you've made an improvement to the lives of Cambridgeshire residents? So it's simply asking for a strategic paper to come back with some measurables. Now, we heard a lot today about what it's not about. What one is about decision-making being a different area. So perhaps the things that you can ask in those KPIs or qualitative or quantitative design are actually to have something that you can measure as an end result that you can gear yourself up towards. So the two amendments are very simply to actually put some solid meat on the bone to actually try and get something to happen. So I'll read them out for you. Amendment D, an additional Amendment D, allocate 400,000 just transition funding per year for 3 years to fund a team who will implement decentralisation projects as part of the Restructure Communities Directorate. And an additional Amendment E, ask officers to bring back to Strategy and Resources Committee as soon as possible an overarching strategic framework and targets for this project to operate in, using key performance indicators indicating quantitative and qualitative criteria, including the repayment of the £1.2 million initial staffing costs. So I hope that will be well received, and it'll actually accelerate the work that you believe in that actually is a little bit incoherent and ethereal at the moment.
Thank you, Steve. Do you have a second? Thank you, Sam. I'll be honest, I would have been surprised, but thank you, Sam. Is there any debate on this amendment before we go to the vote on it? Chris, and then Richard, and then Neil.
Well, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Count for trying to do the administration's work for them. This is the sort of information which really should have been in this paper now, if it were in a fit state to be brought forward to us. And given that we are told that the progress against the actions will be brought to the committee in September, maybe it explains why it's not been possible for this to be brought forward by the administration. Clearly, if there are going to be actions taken, there are going to be costs involved, there are going to be costs in terms of time of officers as well. And I'm just surprised that it hasn't yet been recognised that that is the fact. Now, if we are told today that these details are all going to be brought back in September, then fine. But it would have been nice if, as Councillor Count said, after 13 months, that sort of very broad requirement would have been recognised here. And I think that it really does need to be said that measurement is really important. Whenever you have any significant changes, you need to know, A, what it is you're trying to achieve, what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and B, how do you measure them and how do you report back on them? And that is lamentably lacking in this paper. Again, if we are promised that this is all going to come back in September and we're going to get KPIs, we're going to get clear measurables of performance and of improvement as a result of the proposals that we have in front of us now, or the partial proposals we have in front of us now, then that will be very much welcomed. It's a great shame after 13 months, almost a third of the way through the Lib Dem administration's time, that we haven't yet seen that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. Richard.
Well, let's just agree to disagree about the coherence and clarity of the proposals. I personally am more than happy that a paper that sets out principles and philosophy and communicates what we're trying to do at a broad level ensures that therefore our staff, our partners, citizens, even possibly the opposition come into that big picture. I think that's a perfectly proper thing to do before coming forward with more detailed proposals. I do welcome the proposals. Councillor Count asked to welcome them. Of course, we welcome them as interesting and constructive suggestions. I think why we respectfully should disagree with setting up a new staff team on this is that this is about decentralised and currently fairly centralised, or at least siloed, departments and directorates. And so bringing people from those and getting them together to drive this change rather than adding on an extra layer may not be the best way to do it. So that's why we don't propose that at this time. And as the chair has already said, in terms of KPIs, when there are specific actions, that's the time to deal with those, not at this point when we're dealing with philosophy and principles.
Thank you, Richard. Neil, did you want to come in now?
So I just wanted to make a couple of points. So I think, as Amanda Ascombe said, this is about an approach. It is about embedding that approach. So the whole idea of creating a central decentralization team to come along and do decentralization to groups, I think, is anathema to that. It is about working with, as Councillor Hoy said, working with other bodies in terms of sort of co sort of creation. So I think that would be a negative to really create the sort of transition and the change in the approach which is being sought here. If I can just take the opportunity to go on to talk about the resources and the pilots. I think in 8.1 it recognises that there will be sort of business cases associated with this, which will develop, which will have resources associated with it. And I'm sure Amanda's team will be supporting the various pilots and processes with expertise and input into that. But that is very different from being done to. It is about sort of being supported on these pilots. I think the pilots are a really good approach as you try to embed these principles. But we really need to make sure that those pilots explore the breadth of the opportunities and explore the limits possible in doing so. This is not just about doing the same things as we've done before and using a different way of describing it. It is about sort of trying to embed a different approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Is there any more debate on the amendment before we? Yes, Steve.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to come back, Chair. I'm rather bemused that people are saying that actually this approach is better than the previous administration's place-based working approach, because the only way you're going to get to where you want to go is through place-based working. Had we introduced place-based working last summer, you would have the answer, a bottom-up answer by now to all the things you're thinking about, because that's what place-based working does. Partners working locally to come up with solutions. So my point about we would have the answers by now, you would have been able to design what we're trying to get to in a bottom-up way, because those conversations would already have happened. They're not the solution, they're the way of getting to the solution. That's the whole point of place-based working. So the amendment is merely asking to put some resource behind that, because at the moment that hasn't happened. So obviously there's something lacking somewhere. We need to put some officers on the ground to have those conversations, because place-based working 12 months ago would have given us those answers. So it's not an alternative, it's a means of getting there. And the only way you'll get there now is to have some place-based working going on to have those conversations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. I don't think we've dismissed working with our district and town council partners. In fact, I think I said that's what we will be doing. We're very keen to do that. I think what I said was that we wouldn't simply be handing things over to them. We'll be handing everything over to them. There's still that conversation to have as we move forward. Interested that Councillor Count said that the Conservative group don't disagree with the principle of decentralisation. They, of course, did vote against 3 recommendations that went to Cosmic in March. I think they did that en bloc. So it was good to see that, or hear that they're actually now in favour of decentralisation. I don't think that was entirely clear. Bit of mischievousness from me there, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Before I sum up, is there any more debate on the amendments? No, there isn't. By way of summing up, there were only 2 things I was going to say, which is first, to Steve's point, place-based working isn't the thing, it's part of the thing. And I do actually want us to go and have those conversations according to principles that we have designed. And that's basically the point of this. The reason I'm not keen on these amendments is that they put a massive cart before the horse. You know, there are echoes on the old transformation team. That's not what we're trying to do. We've not given like 3 members of staff or however many money and saying, go and do this work. We are the transformation team. This council needs to work in a decentralized manner. It's a huge thing to do. And we need to start at the beginning, not at the end. And any budgeted proposal that will come forward as part of this will be budgeted and detailed and have KPIs and come to this committee for discussion. And hopefully by that point, we will build the puzzle one piece at a time. This, if you want, is the puzzle box. I don't know if these metaphors are doing anything for you, but you know, if it's not very clear, I'm trying my best. So I'm not going to recommend that we accept these recommendations. However, it's now time, I think, to go to the vote. Shall we take them both on block unless there's any, yes, Steve?
Happy to second the amendment, Chair.
Sure, no, Sam did that, didn't she?
Did you? Sorry. Okay.
That's fine, no problem. So we'll take both of them if there's no problem with that. Everyone in favor, please. Hold on. Everyone against? Hold on. Are there any abstentions? I don't see any. Michelle?
Chair, the result is 7 votes in favour and 8 votes against. The amendment is lost.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That brings us now to the unamended, as they are, recommendations on this paper. Do we want more debate on them? Yes, Steve.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll move to the paper unamended as you the main debate, as you say. I can't support this now today, the same as there's been votes against decentralisation in the past, not because totally against decentralisation, as was inferred by Councillor Sanderson, but if something isn't right, isn't put together right, and there's no belief in it, it's fluffy, ethereal, etc., you don't want to back it when it's in that state. And without the funding, it's not going to go anywhere. Under 4.1, it states, and this is in the paper, stand up a dedicated team to work with services on new decentralised models, which moves more services, funding and power to local communities with ambitious targets and delivery timelines. So that was actually what I was asking you to do, what you've actually want in 4.1 in the paper, to actually do, as they say, you know, it says what it says on the tin. That's what we were trying to do. But without that, it's clear that you're not ready to actually back this. You're not ready with the paper. And actually the answers we heard earlier meant that you couldn't define it. So I won't be supporting this as it stands. But when you do get it ready and it comes back in September, I will review it then. On the actual substance of the paper, there's an element in there about the swap and heat project. And I'm glad of the continued support that the joint administration is giving this project that the Conservatives started. However, I've got to point out, seeing you, Ryan, that my biggest concern is since the joint administration have taken over, costs on projects have spiraled out of control and they're delayed and they're late. You're 80 million behinds on your capital projects at the end of 1 year. And with inflation running as they are in the construction industry and other industries, I have worries about how you're going to deliver that if there are any further or more increased costs going forwards, as well as the other projects. And this is one example of existing from the Conservatives' decentralisation, where it's used. So we were on that route. It was a good route, but you also have to take the strategic responsibility. When you decentralise, you can devolve decision making, but you can't devolve responsibility. So I use projects going out of control as an example. You have to be aware that as you let the decision making go, if things go wrong, it's not those decision makers who are misspending Cambridgeshire taxpayers' money, it's yours for allowing that. So you need a certain amount of governance in place to deal with that. And that's part of the structure that's missing here. How do you maintain your responsibility whilst letting go of the decisions? So overall, I'm very sorry, Chair, but in this unfit state, I can't support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Very appreciated. Is there anyone else? Chris on the lawn.
Thank you, Chair. I've been a bit puzzled by the structure of this debate because, and I think it was your intention as well, Chair, that we would have gone originally immediately to the amendment, discuss that, and then come back and have the main debate. And it was somewhat sidelined by Councillor Count, who asked an awfully simple question: what is meant by decentralisation in this paper? And I was astonished by the variety of responses that were given by members of the administration, Lib Dems and otherwise. But I was astonished by the variety of interpretations given to that answer. Now, many of them were partially congruent. I'm not saying that they were necessarily contradictory, but there was no coherence in the answers that we were given. So my request to the members opposite is, when this comes back in September, could we have a simple, clear and agreed answer from the administration about what this is about? Thank you.
I will take that very much on board, Chris. Lorna.
Thank you. I'm very sorry that Councillor Count is floundering with this paper and with the concepts in it. And I'm very sorry that Councillor Bowden also appears confused. We are not. We are very clear about what we're trying to do with this, and we have tried to explain that in as many words as we can that will help. We've tried to give those explanations. I'm sorry that those still aren't understood, but maybe with a little more work, the members opposite will come on board with this. I'm very surprised to hear that the arrival of the joint administration just over a year ago was responsible for the inflation that countries across the world are experiencing. I'm surprised that the joint administration was responsible for the war in Ukraine. I'm surprised that the joint administration was responsible for the consequences of Brexit. All of that is news to me, but all of those things are very clearly matters that not just this authority, but many others are grappling with. That has led to increased costs on many projects, not out of control increased costs, but costs that we are constantly monitoring and working through to try and address what that means for the various projects we're doing. And that is not an easy task. It wouldn't be an easy task, whoever was sitting in the seats we're sitting in, but we are doing our very best to deal with those national and in some cases international issues. And I'm very surprised indeed that Councillor Count would suggest that we're entirely responsible for those things happening. We are responsible for dealing with the consequences, and we're doing that in a very responsible manner.
Thank you very much for that. Sam, did you want to come in now?
Yeah, I wasn't going to speak again, but I did take a little bit of exception to Councillor Dupre's comments, because it felt very much like you're sneering at us for not understanding the paper. But if we're in a local government world and we don't understand the paper, how on earth are communities supposed to understand what's happening and what's being done to them? We have people in my town, English isn't their first language. Some people are unable to read and write, and they shouldn't be sneered at and look down their noses for not understanding these concepts. It really makes me frustrated when I come to meetings like this. And I think there seems to be, it's a national thing as well rather than local. A lot of people on the left wonder why they don't why they don't win in poorer areas, and it's perhaps because you talk to people like they are idiots, and people don't appreciate that. People want to have you bring them along with them, not talk to them like you know better than them, you know what's good for them, and they are silly people that should just be quiet and go away.
Thank you, Sam. Is there any more debate on this? I see nothing, so I will sum up very briefly by saying that I think the debate today has been actually really interesting and really useful for me. So, you know, comments and other things aside, I mean, I think there are two things that stood out for me very much. The first one is, you know, I completely agree with what Sam has said. We do not want to sneer at people for not understanding things. we do, and especially when it comes to those communities that we're going to work with, you know, we are going to go and work with them on the ground, and we're not going to show them philosophy papers. I mean, philosophy papers are for us, that's part of our job. You know, and the second point that's really, really important is what Steve said earlier. We are decentralizing delivery and decision making, but we are not decentralizing responsibility. And this will be absolutely at the heart. There is you will never hear me say it's somebody else's fault for doing things, for things going, unless it's true. But usually when that happens, the person responsible is at the top of me, not at the bottom, if you understand what I'm saying. You know, there are a lot of things I'm blaming central government for, but, you know, it's never going to be the fault of the communities we work with, and that's absolutely very important. So having summed up thus, I am going to read the recommendations that we're about to vote on. So we agree to the policy framework that drives the Council's decentralization approach, as per sections 2.1. We agree the design principles for the decentralization work as laid out in section 2.3. And we note and endorse the next steps and the pilot approach. That's the important thing, the pilot approach, as at 4.1 and 4.2. Everyone in favor, please. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Are we making sense, Michelle?
Chair, the result of the vote is 8 votes in favour, 4 votes against and 3 abstentions. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That brings us to item 6, I believe, on our agenda, which is the secure web gateway. Sam, are you here?
Yeah, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, and we can even see you. That's great. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. So this paper is to talk about the procurement of secure web gateway services for the council. And the outcome, if agreed, is that we will purchase secure, flexible, scalable gateway services that will support the future strategic ambitions of Cambridge County Council. And this is in line with the joint IT strategy approved by both Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Council in 2019. The Strategy and Resources Committee are asked to agree to the procurement of these services and to delegate the award of the contract to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the committee. The procurement itself is of a technical nature, and I'm more than happy to take or answer any questions on that. I would also like to just step through some of the issues and some of the benefits. So the main issues are to ensure that the council remains secure in its networking and in its services, and this area is absolutely fundamental to that. There are also issues around the support of remote, flexible and hybrid working, and to ensure that the absolute dependency that the council has on IT is covered. In terms of the benefits of these services that we are seeking to procure, they do bring us into a position whereby we can have the future-proofed, scalable, secure, flexible technical services in this particular area. From the point of view of as I said, from the point of view of the technicalities, more than happy to take any questions on those. It's also worth noting that we will be getting ratification of the overall approach from an external assurance perspective as well. I'm happy to take any questions on any parts of the paper.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you for this detailed report that we have today. Are there any questions for Sam? Yes, Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Sam, could you give us some information about the possible additional costs? It refers in 4.2 that there will be some additional spend, but it doesn't indicate whether that's a little amount or a big amount. And then you also talked about future proofing for changes in technology. How long do you anticipate this system will last before you need to come back for further approval for a different system? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to answer now, Sam?
Entirely up to you, Chair.
Are there any more questions for Sam? Doesn't look like it. There you go. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Wilson, so the procurement overall will be over a set period of time. So the initial contract is likely to be for a period of 3 years, and the costs over the period of that time would be over the £500,000 value. Hence the reason for the contract for the procurement coming to this committee. We have undertaken some soft market testing, so we do have some indicative indications of cost, but we don't have exact costs at this point. We have indications are that it will cost approximately between 150 to 250,000 pounds in this financial year over and above the existing revenue budgets. We've worked with finance colleagues on that basis. In terms of the answer to your second question, we would need to come back from a procurement perspective at the end of the contractual period, or when we have to re-procure. So we always make sure that we work within the contract regulations and the procurement framework of the council. So it may be that a particular technology that is procured at this point is also re-procured at a future point, but we would go through a particular procurement process in order to make sure that we are compliant and that we get best value for the council. So there is, to an extent, for us, a distinction between the technologies and the processes that we need to make sure that we go through to ensure the council are compliant and have a cost-effective solution.
Thank you, Sam. Is that okay, Graham? Do you have any comeback? Now, yes, Steve.
Thank you. I didn't ask a question because Graham asked the completely correct question, which is what is the finance involved? Because the delegation is to agree to delegate the award of this contract to Section 151 officer in consultation with the chair and the vice chair. And I'm staggered to have a paper in front of me with no finance, and I'm supposed to put my hand up in the air and delegate it. Even when you do ask what is a straightforward question, you don't get a proper answer. You get told, well, it's going to be 150 to 250 more this financial year. It's a 3-year project and no indication for the other years. I don't know why we haven't got this indication, but I've got to say that without some more flesh on the bone and without some kind of range, why on earth would this committee be asked to delegate responsibility? The fact that it's over 500,000, we have to ask a question whether it's 50 million, 5 million or 500,000 a year. And even when you ask the question, you don't get a fleshed out answer. It's not good enough. I don't know whether Sam will is able to give any kind of ranges for the other years, but for me, it's too little too late. And I think this is partially caused by your quarterly meetings. We've got 3 procurement papers today. They're all flawed, and they're all flawed for various reasons because we don't meet often enough. This one's obviously not ready because we haven't got the financial range. We don't need definitives. We need a range that we're operating in. And I can't support a delegation that is open-ended in this manner. I think it's wholly inappropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the absolutely correct questions which Councillor Wilson raised, which I think all of us must have in our minds. We've all been around the block a few times. I don't think I'm being impolite to say that. And we know, I think all of us from our own personal and professional experience, just how dangerous significant IT projects can be in terms of cost overrun and making sure that there isn't scope creep which causes significant additional costs. I think we've all seen it in all sorts of enterprises, from the National Health Service through central government down to individual companies. So we know it's an area of particular vulnerability. And that's why I share Councillor Count's concerns about what is being requested here. We are told that if any further financial investment is required, either capital or revenue, it'll be identified and taken through the 23-24 business planning process. But that really isn't good enough, because you know as well as I do, Chair, that at that time, there's an enormous quantity of data which comes to us all at once from the whole gamut of responsibilities that the council has got, and that this will be lost inside those very large numbers which exist. So my request, Chair, is that when it is known what the additional capital and or revenue may be, that this comes back to strategy and resources, so that we as a whole, including the administration members, can be assured that the whole process is under financial control. There is a real danger of finances running away with itself on a project such as this. I know we've got professional officers, but we've all seen it go wrong. So, Chair, may I request that this come back as a specific separate paper at some stage in the future when it's appropriate to do so, so that strategy and resources can be assured that this matter is under control, that we know what the additional costs are going to be. Thank you.
Now, before I answer that, is there anybody else who wants to make any more points about this? Because my impression is, and I'm looking, I see nothing. My impression is that while I am very happy to have an update on how this is going as soon as we possibly can, and in fact, multiple ones if that's what it takes, because we absolutely appreciate, I mean, IT can go extremely wrong, extremely badly, and extremely quickly sometimes. And it's not the fault of the poor people working on it. On the other hand, we can't delay this decision because I think that probably will not allow that update to come forward. And therefore, I would like to ask that we note a requirement for members to be updated, but we proceed with the decision today. If there is no further debate, shall I just read out the recommendations that we are required to vote on? We agree to the procurement of a set of services, which we require, and we agree to delegate the award of this contract to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the chair and vice chair of this committee. Everyone in favor, please. You all go, Michelle? Everyone against? And any abstentions? I see none. Michelle?
Chair, the result of the votes is 8 votes in favour, 7 against, no abstentions. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you very much indeed. That brings us to item 7, which is about the highway system replacement. John and Chris, are you here somewhere?
Yes, good morning. We're online. Good morning. Thank you, Chair.
Well, we got both of you and we can see you, so that's great. Can you introduce the report, please?
Sure. This report is to request the approval of the committee to go out to tender for the procurement of a replacement highways IT system. We've been working closely with colleagues in procurement and upon their recommendation went out for soft market testing, which is essentially a review of the current market of suppliers with an initial requirement specification. That initial soft market testing has led us to look at a number of systems, and an initial indication of the cost of the procurement is likely to exceed £500,000. The requirement is to implement a replacement highways IT system, which will benefit from.
Hang on. Sorry. I'm very sorry to have to interrupt. I think you've started to go extremely robotic on us. Is your connection okay?
Apologies. Can you hear me now?
We can, yes. Do you want to try and turn your camera off? I don't know, maybe that helps.
Yeah, sure.
Start again from exceeds 500,000. I think that's when we started to lose you. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, no apologies. The procurement is, upon looking at the providers in the marketplace for the required solution, costs are likely to exceed £500,000, hence coming here for requests to go out for procurement. We've worked with colleagues in procurement to determine the most appropriate route forward, and we'll be procuring through an established framework. Just checking you can all hear me still.
That's considerably better than before. Thank you. I'm very sorry that we lost your face.
No, that's fine. The procurement of the new system will focus on new technologies, on automation, on enabling and mobilisation of officers to carry out their activities in the field as much as possible, and including integration with existing systems, for example, the finance systems and our main contractors' systems, to limit the amount of manual handling of data and paperwork and any issues that will ensue. It's also going to include a full review of the ability to report issues from the public and from members, and that in itself will aid the repairs of the highway network as well. We've also got a workshop planned with members of the Highways and Transport Committee to ensure that requirements for public engagement are also captured. Any questions, please?
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Are there any questions for Chris? Yes, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. When dealing with any procurement, I've got no objection, of course, to what is being proposed here in principle. Clearly, we need to make sure that we have something which is up to date. We need to make sure that that is done in an appropriate way. And I'm sure that all of the procurement rules are going to be followed. We are being presented with something, and I have absolutely no idea how much this is, what we're talking about here in terms of what we're giving approval for. We're told in the introduction that it is likely that the cost will be over £500,000. That, of course, is the reason why it's coming before S&R. I understand that. When we go to paragraph 4.1, we're told in terms of resource implications, capital and revenue costs for Cambridgeshire County Council, 2022-3 and 2023-4, about £500,000. Now, I don't know if that's about £500,000 as being the total cost or in each year. And I don't know if it is, if we are talking about something which is, well, we are talking about something which is apparently going to be over £500,000. What scale of over 500,000 are we talking about? Are we talking about a potential procurement contract which is going to be 5 to 10 million? Are we talking about something which is going to be in the scale of 500,000 to 1 million? Now, I think it's not unreasonable for us to know and to understand what is the scale, what is the approximate scale of the amount of cost which we're talking about here. The whole purpose of having a procurement process, of course, is to get the best scheme, the best IT that you can for the least amount of money that you have to spend. So I'm not asking for 375,264. I'm not asking to the nearest pound, but at least give us some guidance as to the order of magnitude of how big this is going to be. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Before I ask for an answer to this question, yes, Graham, I will take a couple more if there are. And Edna, but Graham first.
If I can just add on to Chris's point about the costs, the years 2024-25 isn't described here. Hopefully all the capital costs are paid off by then, but is there revenue implications over and above existing commitments that we should be aware of? And secondly, what is the life of this system? Same as previous questions about the previous system. How soon are you likely to have to come back to S&R asking for more money for another new system? And then the final question, I'm delighted that you're going to involve H&T in the development of the spec, but presumably H&T will finally sign off on the procurement as well at some stage. And perhaps you could just describe how that's going to take part. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Edna, did you want to ask a question as well?
Yeah, I'd really just like to know a bit more about how the requirements for this have been developed so far. From my perspective, you know, my experience as a new councillor has been that trying to obtain information to which one should be entitled as a member, if not a citizen, on progress against reported highways faults, for example, is really poor. And I've been told that a new system is coming, and I just want to know, you know, is this the system? And if it is, I just wonder how it is that, you know, one seminar with members of a committee, welcome though it is, after the procurement process has been started, it doesn't really seem to me to put a proper emphasis on information provision. So it just leads me to question, how have the requirements been put together? And in terms of the governance, how involved have the chair, vice chair of highways, and indeed the members of the Highways Committee been involved in the development of these requirements?
Thank you, Edna. There are more questions I can see, but there's 3 now. So maybe you could, if you could answer John and Chris at this point, and then I'll take more. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, I will answer what I can. So with regard to costs, quite simply, until a procurement exercise has been completed and we have the full costs on the table from suppliers, it's unknown. However, we do have capital investment set aside for the implementation of these products, and based on our experience of previous procurements with similar size systems, the amount of money that we have budgeted for the capital investments of the implementation of these systems, it sits well with our experience.
Chris, I'm really sorry, bad problem again. Can you turn your camera off?
Sorry, camera off, apologies. Can you hear me now?
It's all good, start again.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, it's good now.
Okay, thank you. So just to recap, hope if you didn't catch that, is based on our experience of previous procurements of systems of this scale, we believe that we have identified the capital investment required for implementation. With regard to the ongoing revenue costs of the solution, that will be determined through the procurement. We don't have costs directly of what the solutions will be, because again, it will be determined by the outcome. We are expecting the annual costs to be in the range of 100 to 150,000 pounds a year, but it is unclear right now what those costs will be. Again, it will need to be determined by the outcome of a procurement exercise.
Thank you. There was, before I bring more people in, and Chris again, there was a question about whether or not this exercise, or in the leading up to the paper that we've got today, if there's been any involvement from the Highways and Transport Committee.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There were 2 more questions. One was around duration. Again, we'll be working with procurement colleagues on the duration, but it's likely that the contract term will be in the region of 3 to 5 years, maybe with additional extension periods within that. And the specification has been written by colleagues, professional colleagues internally within the Highway Service and within IT service, who have extensive experience in the operation that they work within, and within the IT of the actual delivery of products as well. We believe that specification meets the requirements that have been building over the last few years. I mean, we mentioned, the paper mentions, the requirement for having an up-to-date modern product, modern solution. So the actual requirements have been gathered through that process. And then with the additional engagement of Highways and Transport members to ratify what we're proposing, and to make sure that we've actually captured what the public engagement requirements are likely to be. This is a very niche area. There are only a small number of products on the market, and the ability for the public to be able to report and get feedback as automated as possible is something that the public expect now. So it'll be high on our agenda to ensure that requirement is captured correctly and procured correctly.
Thank you. Right, I've got a few people. Chris, you can have a comeback very quickly, but yes, I've got more questions.
I'm very grateful that we were told 100 to 150,000 per annum being the revenue cost. That's the sort of information I think which should honestly have been in the paper and should have been disclosed to us previously. There's nothing secretive about a broad range like that, but we're still not told what the expected broad range would be of the capital cost. And I wonder if that information could be given to us, please. A broad range.
We will come back to that if John and Chris have made a note of that. I know Neil has a question, and then somebody else down here, I swear, Doug. Neil first.
Okay, so I've got a comment first, which is reflective of the scars on my back from involvement in enterprise resource implementations in the private sector, and then a question about it. So my experience is basically, while the actual procurement itself is for an IT system, when you go out for something like this, you don't really buy an IT system. What you buy is a set of world-class business processes, which are embedded and translated into an IT system. And what I have seen in the private sector, replicated by my experience as public sector, is that you take a system like this and then you seek to customize it, and you embed in it a lot of additional costs associated with customization. So my question here is about the process of implementation and the balance between making something which is fit for purpose, but actually preserving the integrity of the efficiency of the IT system. And that may seem rather technical, but my experience is that is absolutely at the core of what either makes systems work or gets systems out of control. In the paper, where is it? Sorry, I'm losing it here because of the way. Bear with me. Bear with me. Anyway, when we talk about the resource implications, we talk about not just highways and transport, but also the IT professionals. And my question is, how are we making sure that in the implementation of this, there is the balance on change requests, which are coming from highways versus the cost of those changes or customization, which is coming from the IT professionals? And is there a process in parallel with this to change the work processes within highways and transport to take advantage of the capabilities of this system and make sure that we don't undermine the effectiveness of any system we procure by customization, which essentially undermines it? And maybe that's a question for the chief executive as well as the actual individual departments, because it goes to the sort of core of how you actually manage these implementation processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Doug. Is your name Doug? I'm so sorry. I thought you were. I do massively apologize.
Yeah.
I'm really,
I'll answer
really
the Doug.
sorry.
I'll answer the Doug or whatever.
Seriously, yeah. I wish I could be in a whole room. I'm really, really sorry. We were saying, John.
Yeah. I wasn't going to ask the question. I was going to speak in the main debate, but I just wanted to pick up something that was commented in the answer to Councillor Murphy's question, because I sit on the Highways Improvement Board, which now has had 5 meetings since it was set up in September. I'm also on the Highways and Transport Committee, and I'm not aware that we've had any discussion about this at all. And I was going to mention that in the main debate, but I think one of the speakers mentioned that it had been discussed with Highways members. It certainly hasn't been discussed with the general membership, which is one of my criticisms of this paper. But I just wanted to clarify, is that just being discussed with chair and vice chair of the committee?
Thank you. We'll come back to that one as well, to that question. Lorna.
Thank you. I'm going to start my question by saying that in many respects, I agree with the points that have been made by Councillor Bowden and by Councillor Sharp. I'm surprised at the way in which this paper has come straight to this committee without reference to the Highways Improvement Board, or as far as I know, to anybody within Highways. This is a really important piece of work, and if we get it right, the outcome will be really good, because it's something that members of this body, not this council, not to mention members of the general public, have been crying out for. And also, to be fair, officers, contractors, and everybody is a system that actually works. And if this goes well, it'll be great. But I think that not having engaged the Highways members at an early stage, or the Highways Improvement Board, does not augur well for how it's going to be implemented. So my question to officers is, what are the time constraints on this procurement? And if we were to say to officers, we wish to either vote this down and ask you to come back with something better, or defer it for further work and further consideration about how this works across the authority, what kind of a spanner, if any, would that put in your works? And if we looked at this at the next meeting instead of this one, what would the impact be on the timetable for the procurement?
Thank you, Lorna. And I think you've got a couple of questions now. So what Chris was saying about the capital implications, what Neil was saying and what Lorna is asking, would you be able to comment now?
I will, but I'll also turn my camera off. Although I do apologise, it would be much better if it could remain on. So I will try and answer some of these questions. I may defer to my colleague John Munslow for others around previous engagement with members. So with regard to capital costs, I understand there is £500,000 allocated, split over this financial year and next financial year for the implementation of the product. Now that those are full capital costs, including implementation or any additional staff costs required for that implementation. I hope that answers that question. With regard to member engagement, if I can, John, could I hand over to you for that? But just as I do, with regard to timescale, the intention is to have this implemented and live by April 24. These systems take a considerable amount of time to implement. Part of that implementation is to review the how the services work. So it's not to simply look at how a service works now and do a like-for-like replacement. It's a perfect opportunity to understand how a service works, how a process will work, and how that can be changed to improve its efficiency, and therefore then reflected also through the implementation of that product. It's what we've done in the IT service in a number of systems, including adult social care and children's social care. So we're absolutely not going to be just implementing a system mirroring current process. Process will be reviewed during implementation. John, I wonder if you could come in, please, with regard to the involvement of members.
Yes, thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. With regard to involvement of members, we have the workshop on the 21st of July, and that's certainly not intended to be the only engagement with members to help develop the specs for the elements of the system that are obviously important to yourselves, but also for that effective customer engagement. We also
I'm so very sorry, John, so very sorry. I mean, there is clearly a problem here. You're starting to go away as well.
Okay.
It's very sad that we can't see your faces, but I think we will have to make that sacrifice, otherwise we can't hear you. Sorry.
No problem, thank you. Would you like me to reiterate what I just said? Would that help?
Yes, please, briefly recap.
Yeah, the engagement with members, we have the workshop on the 21st of July with Highways and Transportation members. That is not necessarily the only engagement with members, and I am keen and I will make sure that we continue to work with Highways and Transportation Committee to develop the spec, particularly around the customer engagement elements and that all important customer feedback. Coming in to respond to some of the other elements of the questions with regard to ensuring that we maximise the efficiencies and effectiveness of a new system. Part of the project and work we're doing now is to re-engineer our current business processes internally with regard to how officers use the systems to support efficient service delivery. So that's a key part of us implementing that system, and we're working on that now. I think Councillor Dupre, you asked about what the implications of a delay to the system are. I mean, if we were to delay going out to market and seeking the optimum supplier, effectively it would just delay the benefits that we would get by whatever amount of time we delayed. Personally, I don't think there is a need to delay. I think we can ensure that we engage with yourselves and develop the spec as we go through that procurement process, rather than trying to do it all ahead of engaging with potential suppliers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we go back to members for more debate on what we just heard, I think Stephen would like to come in, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was also asked a question around system procurement generally. So I think for the benefit of the committee, the comment I would make is, having led IT services in other places for considerable periods of time, the first and golden rule of thumb for system replacement, in my view, is adopt, not adapt, because customization costs and has an immediate cost, both in terms of early implementation, but in terms of ongoing system development costs and maintenance. So I think there's a more fundamental principle that needs written into the refresh of the IT and digital strategy for the council, which is due to come forward, I believe, in or around February of next year. Work is currently underway on that. But actually that underlying principle of the council will change its business processes to the systems it buys where possible, assuming they are best practice and meet our needs, rather than us tinkering with systems, creating redundancies and extra costs, and quite frankly, causing longer term problems, particularly in terms of upgrades. So to my mind, the question was absolutely spot on. And it's something that I would expect officers to be considering as part of any system procurement process, not just for highways. I think on the broader points that members have raised around, should this come back, I can give you my view. I think further work is perfectly reasonable to ask officers to take away from committee today. I think deferring the decision today, you've heard, may delay some of the benefits, but might allow officers to come back with a clearer scope, clearer costings, and a more coherent proposition for committee to consider. So to my mind, I'm comfortable with the report being deferred and coming back with a greater scope, having involved a workshop with elected members, but also would want to be reassured personally that those principles around adopt, not adapt, are being underwritten in the procurement process as well. So that's my view, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Therefore, could I move deferral of this item?
Yes, you can, certainly. Yes, Steve.
Chair, that's entirely appropriate that Councillor Dupre does move such as that, and it's your right to have that now if you think the debate has fully been heard. You can accept that at any point in time. I would like to say that I've got some points I'd like to feed into this before you take that point to be deferred, but I will be supporting Councillor Dupre's motion to defer if that's acceptable.
Of course, I am quite happy for that, and I actually would like us to make a little bit of a summary of what we want officers to go away and do before this comes back, lest we waste the opportunity. But I am going to, if you'll agree with me, I'm going to take that at some point after a couple more people have spoken, Lorna will have made that recommendation and you will have seconded it. And I will, but before we actually do that, because if we do that, then we have to vote. Chris, would you like to speak?
Yeah, very briefly, I'm more than happy to support the proposal from Councillor Dupre. And there are, I think we've all identified that this paper is not really in a form and hasn't been through the processes you'd have expected to get to us today. It does have your name, Chair, and also Councillor Nethinga's on it. May I just ask, do you get to see these papers before they come to us? Or is this paper in your name, or are you just merely there as a contact rather than a person responsible for it? And I'm not trying to get at you here personally, Chair. What I'm saying is this paper shouldn't have come to us in the form that it is. I learned just from one of the answers we've just heard now that this isn't actually going to be implemented until April 2024. Now, I read through this paper 3 or 4 times, and I thought it was going to be implemented in April 2023. Now that I read it again, having heard that answer, I now understand from rereading the paper yet again that it is April 24, but the paper was so badly written that it looked as though the existing contract was finishing in April 23, and I assumed the new contract would come in April 23, and it won't. So having this paper thoroughly rewritten is a very good idea, but may I suggest, Chair, that someone works out how it is that this paper came to S&R in the form that it is, to make sure that in future the same sort of thing doesn't happen again. And may I also very much welcome the Chief Executive's very wise comments about IT. If we follow all of those processes in future as far as IT is concerned, I think we'll be very much going along the right lines.
Thank you. I will address some of your points in a moment, but before we do that, is there any discussion about, because before we move that, Alan, I am desperately sorry, and I will be sorry for the next year and a half.
Okay, yeah, just briefly, I won't sort of mention all I was going to mention. I totally support what Councillor Dupre is saying. I do think that this is not ready to come to us. But I just wanted to make a couple of points. I think the two key pieces of software systems we are looking at is the reporting system that the members of the public, because I'm sure all of us get comments from members of the public about the thing doesn't work the way it should at the moment. And also knowing from the Highways Improvement Board, the IT system, or the system that the staff use for report when they're out on the field, is certainly in need of a lot of improvement and a lot of bringing up to speed. And finally, as I won't talk too much, I totally agree with what the Chief Executive is saying about adopt, not adapt. And I think if this is going to Highways and Transport Seminar or to Highways Improvement Board, the officers need to bring examples of software that can be adopted. So maybe we have to change, because again, I know from IT systems in the past, once you go off a standard package, the costs absolutely just skyrocket. So we need to get a package that fits our needs, does what we want, but at the same time, that may mean we have to tweak the way we do things.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alan. Is there any more? Yes, Edna.
Yes, thank you. I welcome a pause to develop these ideas further. In terms of the further work, I would like to suggest two things. One is that the provision of information to members and indeed residents is to be considered a core function, not an extra add-on. And the second thing is that I would really value, and I think we would all value, that the ideas, the capabilities, both the requirements, but also then the capabilities of the software that we want to adopt can be well socialized, not just with the Highways Improvement Board, although that would be good, not just with the Transport Committee, although that would be good, but wider than that, because it is a question of what do we want, and then of what's out there, what is best in class, etc. And then how do we adopt it, but then we may have to rethink how we deliver the things that we need.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Are there any further points? Yes, Steve.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we've established so far that this was a poor procurement paper, in my opinion, the same as the last one, and we're going to hear about the next one. And there's got to be some sort of look at the process of what comes in front of this committee, because it's not often that you get to get that one ask that one gets deferred and comes back at a later date. And whilst we're going to ask for it to come back at a later date, I want to officers and Stephen Moyer to put some consideration into the fact that the next Strategy and Resources Committee under this joint administration, I think is September the 20th. I mean, you know, under the old administration, if we wanted this done, we would have come back within a month or at the most 2 months, and we'd have arranged our workshops and papers coming back there. So you've got a question to ask yourselves, is this working well when you defer papers and give yourself 3 months to do it? But that's one for yourself. That's how you set it up, and you'll lose three months worth of opportunity cost lost in 2024 if you do it that way. But I just want to point out some of the things that haven't been picked up on. So we were told about IT, and we talked about a holdaway service. Did we look at the contact centre? The contact centre is busy answering their phone about potholes and things like that. Did we ask about members' time? I know I wasn't asked about members' time, but these are the ones where I get the phone calls because the current system doesn't work. So the work processes that are being picked up are not all encompassing, and that they've missed an opportunity here to pick up on the rich tapestry that there is in the members cohort. We heard from Councillor Goff, his experience in the IT world and what he could bring to the table. Councillor Murphy correctly identified that, you know, the member input was, and the public input was left out the loop, and the people who know the public the best, I'm sorry, it's not officers, it's members, and they're missing out on that. At the spokes meeting, Councillor Bowden asked, do you see the papers beforehand? We saw them at the spokes, and I picked up, did I not? I picked up, how on earth did this get into front of Strategy and Resources Committee without going through the Highways Improvement Board and the Highways Committee to get here in the first place? And then what we had was a tagged on effort to try and rectify this paper of a members workshop in 1 month's time that we heard earlier on from an officer response will be asked to ratify the specification, to ratify it. We're not here to ratify and rubber stamp things. We're here to add value. So I really welcome the fact that this is going to be deferred and get a full and appropriate input into this. Thank you, Stephen Moyer, for that rescue job, because it wasn't ready. And I think your influence has helped us all to go down a certain route. And I'm going to be supporting Councillor Dupre's wise, it's not an emotion, wise commitment to defer. Thank you.
Thank you. It's getting very close to the point where we want to take that vote. But before that, Richard.
Just to say to Councillor Count on this issue about timescales and so on, August is typically a holiday month. So I don't think this is at all exceptional. They'll come back in September. But my humble advice to the opposition is, when this committee is doing what actually the opposition raised their concern, it's been listened to, and there's been a very good response from both members, but also from the Chief Executive. That's the sort of thing that we should all welcome, that we're listening to each other, and that if there are concerns, they're listened to and responded to. So I think it's a bit churlish then to then start criticising us because of it, because the danger is that puts the doors and the windows closed in the future. So that's where we've listened to each other and shown flexibility and worked together on what is a common concern. Let's welcome that and not then try and score other points against each other, and we can make this council better.
Thank you for that. And I will pick up that last point to answer the question that Chris raised. Yes, these papers do come in our name. Doesn't mean we've written them out. I'm sure you will be unsurprised to know. We are the ones who are going to bring them to this committee and debate them. And, you know, we see them at spokes. We see them sometimes before spokes. We ask questions and we ask questions again. And the expectation is if we get answers that we are satisfied by the day of the committee and during the committee, then that's great. If we don't, and if the debate shows that we're not happy, this is what happens, you know. So I'm not going to take that as a personal point that, you know, it's my fault that this paper isn't good enough. It's not, and it's nobody's fault. We will act on the concerns that have been raised. That's the point of meeting, you know. So on that point, yes, Chris.
I do apologise. May I ask you a question? Because I think sometimes process is really important, and,
yes,
and understanding process is important. When you have early sight of any papers,
yes,
and if you ask questions and you're not satisfied, should the papers not come before this SNR at all? Shouldn't they be pulled and come back only at the next SNR when they're ready? I'm surprised that this one actually got past your questioning.
Sometimes they are, you know. Sometimes you think that, you know, the debate will have a different effect on whether or not you're happy with your questions. You know, if on this point, what the members of Highways and Transport have said has been quite important in confirming the doubts that we had. But without further laboring this point at this point, is it okay if we table what Lorna proposed and Steve has seconded, and we defer this paper until the next meeting with more information on which we will all work together to contribute? May I have everybody in favor of that? I will. Is that unanimous? So that's taken as unanimous. Thank you very much, members, for that. Apologies to the officers, but I am sure that this will be worthwhile work that we're about to do. So, but thank you so much for the work you've done until now, which I know is significant, and for the work you're about to do, which will be significant as well. Was there anything else?
No,
thank you
not for
very
me.
much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, and I do apologize for the connection things, which, you know, it's nice to see your faces when we can. Right, it's almost 12 o'clock. Can we please do at least item 8 before we consider whether we want to stop at that point, which is another tendering item. Tony, would you like to talk to us about it?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's another procurement paper. This relates to the access control system that we have to access a number of our buildings within the estate and also our car parks. It's the system that controls the swipe cards that we all have that we use to get in and out the buildings. We have a current contract in place due to CAM's 2020 programme and the subsequent COVID. That contract was extended on a number of occasions. We've now reached the limit on the number of times we can extend it, so we need to re-tender the entire contract. This is essentially a fixed and closed system that simply controls access into the buildings. It doesn't do anything beyond that. So I would categorize it slightly differently from wider IT systems. It is a digital based system, but it's simply controlling access into and out of buildings. It has some very clear functionality so that we can program the cards. We can decide who gets access to what part of the buildings at what times, and then we can monitor that as well, but it doesn't do anything beyond that, and is not something we would anticipate having any particular customization or development or anything of that sort. So I just make that distinction from a broader IT system. In terms of the contract itself, we're looking to have a slightly longer than normal contract term, as it says in the paper, 8 years, and then 2 single-year extensions. The reason for this is that it involves the installation of hardware, particularly in the buildings, of which there are about 40 on our estate, and that involves disruption and potential cost to the council for that to be carried out. So it's not something we want to do on a sort of regular basis if we can avoid it. So that's been factored in. In terms of the costs, then, as you'll see in the paper, we have an annual revenue cost currently of around £70,000 a year. Over the up to 10 years of this contract, it would be approximately £700,000, which obviously is a key decision. My view on this very simply is that if it's within that ballpark, and one would hope that with innovation and cost savings, costs would come down, but also inflation's going the other way. So there is a bit of a tension there in terms of where the costs will come into the market, will come out in terms of the tender process. If it's dramatically different, then I think it's something we would consider bringing back to committee. But we will hope that it is a competitive market. There are plenty of products out there and a variety of options that we can achieve something that will deliver an effective solution and hopefully a cost saving at the same time. Further, by way of background, the current system we have is essentially a closed proprietary system through G4S. It's their hardware, it's their software. We use that as it's provided, and we pay essentially a management contract for that based on the number of buildings, the number of touch points that we have. At the other end of the spectrum would be a completely open system, so essentially open source software with open hardware, which someone would manage, which may require the replacement of the hardware in the buildings. And the purpose of this tender is to explore the full spectrum of what's in the marketplace and the costs of those, and the impact on the council to find the best solution for the next 8 to 10 years. So that's the proposal of the tender, to explore that market, find if there's innovations that will help us deliver a more effective solution. But as I say, it's focused purely on access control and nothing more broadly. So the paper is requesting authority to initiate that tender process. This is led by property, but with direct involvement of our procurement colleagues who've informed the actual design of the procurement process, and seeking approval or delegated authority for the Director of Resources, myself as Assistant Director of Property, to then make the procurement decision. And that's it, Chair, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much. Are there questions for Tony? Chris?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Tony, for that. And at least we have some numbers and some scale in this, which really does help. So thank you very much indeed for including that. My question is, why is this coming to this meeting of Strategy and Resources and not the last one? Because it's clear from paragraph 4.2 that there are risks now in terms of timing. You're having to keep the timescale short between the award and the contract. You have a fairly tight period for the implementation period, and there is no leeway now, it seems, as far as time is concerned, and it's clear that timing is now being recognised as being a risk. So we've had 3 extensions to this contract, 3 waivers to this contract over and above the original contract itself. So it's been known for a very long time that the contract is going to have to be renewed. Why is it only at this meeting that it's come? Why didn't it come 3 months earlier? Where is the planning involved in the timing for starting the process?
Now, before you answer that, Tony, are there any more questions for Tony? Yes, Graham.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tony, for the presentation. You mentioned about the new hardware installation. Presumably that has a cost. Is that a capital cost that we should be identifying separately? I share Chris's concerns about the potential rush to install this, but presumably one of the options is to continue with G4S, is it? That would be one of the things that you'll be looking at in the review. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Would you like to answer those 2 questions?
Yeah, the FM team with procurement have been working on this for some time, and I think from last autumn, been through a number of iterations. We've also been impacted just in terms of resources in dealing with COVID, particularly late last year, and the requirements to do a lot of ventilation and other works in our buildings and maintain the buildings as COVID safe. We've also had some changes in procurement rules that we've had to work through. So yes, it has been worked on for some time, but unfortunately other things have diverted some of the resources we've had to mean that this has come later than would be desired. So it has been on our radar. As I say, the extensions were initially due to the CAMS 2020 programme to provide continuity in the buildings, because we don't want to be changing access control whilst we're moving people around. And then obviously with the COVID lockdowns and things, again, we've not wanted to get in to try and do work in buildings during that. So it's a mixture of things. It's not ideal, but it has been planned. And as I say, we've been working on it for some time. In terms of the cost and tender process, absolutely. This is why we're going to the market to say we need access control. It's pretty straightforward what we're trying to achieve. What can you offer? And yes, it might be G4S, simply continuation. If it requires a change in hardware, then that's one of the things we want to understand. What are the costs of that? And that's another reason for having the lengthier contract, because we're keen to avoid a capital cost if we can avoid it and maintain the revenue cost. So if you offer a longer contract and it potentially involves a cost-effective solution that is hardware replacement, but the cost of that by the supplier is spread over that 8 to 10 years, then we are hoping that they will, that will provide a competitive alternative. So we're open to all options. We want the market to give us that solution, which, as I say, our hope is that it will be more cost-effective, noting the current pressures in terms of supplies of chips, inflation, and so forth.
Thank you, Tony, for that. Is there any more questions for Tony? I see nothing. Is there any debate on this item? Chris and then Steve. Can one of you go first, please?
Okay. I thought it was polite to let my leader go first. I'm reasonably happy with this. I understand the rationale behind the 8 + 1 + 1. It worries me a little bit whenever you have contracts of that sort of length, but in local government, we've seen some contracts which have been significantly longer even than that. So it's not as though it's unprecedented, but it does worry me, and I hope that all the potential negatives of such a long contract have been taken into account in making that decision, and that when you go to procurement itself, that you ensure that there are suitable provisions in place so that if something does go significantly wrong, that we're not left in a difficult position with an unmanageable contract. My request is obviously to the administration, but also in fact to the chief executive. We've heard that it's not desirable that we've ended up with this paper being presented at this meeting, because really there's now a very tight timescale here, which is recognized in paragraph 4.2. And it is known, especially when you have existing procurements which have been extended, repeatedly extended, it's known when procurements are going to be required to be renewed. Can we please have some better planning to ensure that when a procurement exercise does have to come before this or any other committee, that it does so in plenty of time, so that we're not left at last minute rushing as we are in this particular one? And yes, this is one which has been known about for a long time, and I think it is very disappointing that we're left really with lastminute.com here in terms of the way in which this is being put forward. And that's a structural matter, except we are where we are with this one. I'm happy to support it, even with the 8+1+1, as long as that is safeguarded. But there is a lesson to be learned here, and I look to the Chief Executive as well as members to learn the lesson.
Thank you. We'll take Steve, and then if Stephen wants to make a point, otherwise I think we will take that as read, really. Yes, Steve.
Yeah, so it's along the same lines as Chris said, and basically it's a reflection on the 3 procurement papers, that they're not good enough to come to committee. One's too early, one's too late, one's unspecified. It's a Goldilocks and the 3 bears moment, really, isn't it? So there needs to be something done. I don't want to support this. I don't want to support this not because it's the wrong thing, but if I don't get my message across by voting against and putting my foot down and saying enough is enough, then we won't get anywhere and we won't get any change. So I'm going to use my vote to make a point here that we can't continue to be asked to ratify and rubber stamp things because there are problems. The job of the administration and is to work with officers to solve these problems behind the scenes. And it just seems to be that we're getting a plethora of things coming in front of the committee where we're supposed to be the rescue squad. We're not here to rescue things. You're there to manage things behind the scenes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Points taken. Is there anybody else who wants to say anything? Yes, Graham.
Well, I just wanted to come back on that. I would like to personally commend Tony and the team for producing this paper. I think this is the clearest of the 3 procurement papers. It describes exactly what is required. It talks about 8+1+1. It tells us what the costs are. In questioning, we've explained why we've understood why the paper wasn't produced earlier. I don't think there's much more that they could have done, personally.
Thank you, Graham. Is there any more debate? Stephen, do you want to say anything? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you particularly to Councillors Bowden and Count for the comments, which have absolutely been noted. In response, just a few comments for the benefit of the committee. First of all, in line with Councillor Wilson's comments, actually, I commend Tony and the team for the work they've been doing. I think he's been very circumspect around the capacity within his team, which has been hugely committed to dealing with COVID across our estates, particularly colleagues in facilities management. We have recently strengthened the facilities management team with the new head of facilities management having taken up post. But on the broader points around procurement, it's also fair to say that the head of procurement is very conscious of these issues and is trying to further strengthen arrangements working with services. As some members of the committee may be aware, procurement has been something that the Director of Resources has been helpfully rebuilding capacity for the last year or so. We've not had an in-house procurement function for some time in Cambridgeshire, which references across to the next paper on shared services, I may say. But really importantly, I think when I come to the next item, I can just reaffirm to members that arrangements around procurement, commercial and contract management are very much part of current restructuring proposals that we're looking at, which I've already discussed in confidential session with the Staffing and Appeals Committee. So the points are well made and understood. So thank you to members.
Thank you, Stephen, for that. And thank you, Tony, once again, you know, very, very important and lots of work that has been done on this. It's not always ideal. And, you know, sometimes it's very obviously not ideal. Sometimes it's just a little bit not ideal. We will take it home and we will learn. But I think this is a good paper for us to vote on these recommendations today, which I now propose to do. We are recommended to authorize the retender of this contract, to approve the commencement of the procurement process, and to delegate the authority to the Director of Resources and the Assistant Director of Property, i.e. Tony, to carry this out. Are people happy with this? Everybody in favor, please. Hold on, Michelle. Everybody against? Oh, happy, Michelle. Any abstentions, please? It's one. Are we adding up?
Chair, the result of the vote is 8 votes in favour, 6 votes against and 1 abstention. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you, Tony. Now, I should notify members that as chair of things, my usual approach is to go on until the bitter end. However, you know, I am in the hands of the meeting in terms of whether, sorry, I am sorry, that, you know, I see. No, I was just going to say, if people would like a break, would now be a good time, or do we want to wait a bit longer? I am quite happy to take suggestions. 15 minutes, more or less. 15 is fine. We'll take 15 minutes break and be back around 1:15, a bit later. Yes, Steve.
Before you break, can I ask, is there a prescribed time for the confidential item?
There is, but we're absolutely.
Can we tell the committee what time it is?
We would expect to start it at 1 o'clock. We hope that we will be able to. We will be back at about 17 minutes past, if that's okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Right, we've got 1 minute to go. If we could sort of start thinking about getting started, that'd be great. Quite a lot on. Okay, not a problem. We're still waiting for Tom. Does anybody know if Tom and, oh God, who was sitting there? Oh, of course. Would it be better if we started making movements, because I am quite aware that we've got so much to get going with. So are we quorate? Shall we just start? Which means we will take. Sorry, what? Don't be cheeky. Right. Item 9, is that correct? I think. So, item 9 is shared services update, and it will be introduced by Stephen, please.
Thank you, Chair. As members noted earlier on in the discussion on the rolling actions log, there was an update paper on shared services due for committee today. This paper satisfies that requirement. As members will note, it's a brief update paper outlining arrangements that are intended to continue in a shared environment with Peterborough City Council. Following joint work between myself and the Chief Executive of Peterborough, we've taken into account carefully the reviews of the Local Government Association Peer Challenge, and also taken carefully into account the increased differentiation in agendas between Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and the need to have more resource focused on a purely Cambridgeshire emphasis rather than shared across both authorities. I think in terms of setting out the paper for members, you'll note that in continuing some of the shared arrangements, we've set out key criteria for doing so, particularly around resilience and making sure that we're able to discharge some of our most significant duties and responsibilities. And then finally, Chair, I just wanted to note for members' attention, we are currently looking at the senior leadership arrangements of the Council. Our formal statutory consultation process actually concluded over the weekend. I will be bringing forward a paper to the Staffing and Appeals Committee meeting scheduled on the 4th of July. And Staffing and Appeals Committee have already been privy to some detailed discussions around the thinking on organisational proposal and approved the consultation going ahead. So in many ways, there are two elements to this paper. One is reaffirming where we are on shared services with Peterborough and what's likely to continue. Two is that we're revisiting the senior leadership structure of the Council in response to that need to differentiate and focus more resource on Cambridgeshire. And then finally, as the paper tucks in, which is really rather important for the committee to note, any future strategic decisions relating to new or enhanced shared service arrangements would, of course, require formal policy decisions through the Strategy and Resources Committee, recognising that those decisions can be both local policy decisions or indeed national decisions that could impact us, such as a result of the reforms to adult social care that the government is proposing, or indeed children's social services or the Education Green Paper. So there are clearly a number of things that can impact on our future service delivery that we would need to bring back to members. Chair, that's all I was intending to say by way of introduction. Happy to take questions and comments from members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for the paper and for the introduction right now. Are there any questions for Stephen, please? I now note that everybody's back, which is great. Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you very much indeed, Stephen, for an extremely clear paper. Unusually, I actually understood it the first time I read it. Normally, I have to read council papers, whether they be Cambridgeshire, Fenland, or any other council. I have to read them more than once to try and understand what's being said. In this case, I understood it first time. So thank you very much indeed for the clarity of the paper. And I do understand that there's also a political imperative here in terms of what the joint administration said they were going to do and how they were going to do it. The problem that exists is the balance between the expediency of having shared services in terms of resilience and in terms of capacity, especially in areas which are more niche, and having greater control and sovereignty over your senior staff in particular. And my first question to Stephen is there only one correct answer there, or is there a range of answers which is possible, and that it's that range which is the political decision which has to be made, whereas you, in your capacity as head of paid service, as long as it's within an acceptable range, can manage whatever decision is made? So that's the first question. And the second is a very specific one, because it was mentioned in the last meeting. Now, this technically has nothing to do with Peterborough, but it was mentioned in the last agenda item about procurement. Procurement is a very specialised area, it has to be said. It's quite a complicated one, and what's worse, it's one where the expertise of the staff concerned doesn't always percolate through to the other departments which utilise that service. So since the head of paid service mentioned in particular procurement at the last agenda item, is it correct, is it appropriate for us to attempt to get all of those necessary skills and capacity within our own organisation, or is it appropriate for us to look elsewhere to share services with someone else on that?
Thank you, Chris. If there are a couple more questions, if you're happy, Stephen, I'll take a couple more before you answer. Are there any more questions for Stephen? Richard and then Maria.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I commend this paper, and also I commend the Chief Executive. I think he's come into tenure and managed to have a very cooperative and consensual discussion with his opposite number in Peterborough, which is enabling us to tackle some of these issues without any negativity and in a very constructive atmosphere. And I think that is to be welcome. I think I hope we have really listened to what the peer review said, the LGA peer review said about us not being strategic enough in this area. And I think and hope that we are going down a road which enables us to be really strategic in our objectives. And I look forward to the Chief Executive's answer to Councillor Bowden's question, but I hope it'll be yes, that of course there can be a range of options of how this is done. But I think what the Joint Administration is trying to do is to say that we prize our cooperation with Peterborough, but we prize our cooperation with other authorities, and also that we're trying to alter the balance between a past model which has been too focused on expertise and specialism more and more at a centralised level towards a more decentralised level, which is perhaps different from the model that Peterborough themselves are operating, and that where we want shared services, they can be with all sorts of organisations and authorities and not exclusively with Peterborough. So that's what I would hope. My question to the Chief Executive is this. In paragraph, and of course, my IT has gone down just to the point I want to refer to my notes, because that's what happens in this room. In relation to section 2.3 of the report, the crucial words in that paragraph are at senior level. And I think it's really important, as far as children's services are concerned, public health and adult services, that we send out a clear message that we're also looking hard at that in the same constructive fashion. But that although we definitely want the senior leadership to change, we're looking hard at what's going to be happening beneath the senior leadership in those areas. And I think it would be helpful if that message was reinforced by the Chief Executive and he could inform members here on all sides some of the work that is being initiated in relation to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I'll take Maria and then we'll have a first round of answers.
Thank you. I have a question, Stephen, around what you said in your remarks and possibly in around 2.6. So if you could just give a little bit more on what the process is going to be for proposed new shared services arrangements, because
what I'm reading here is it's a political decision, and those decisions will come to this committee. But I'm very aware that within CYP, for example, there are a couple of proposals which are sort of in the suspended state at the moment, and whether it would be good to understand whether they would now go straight to this committee, or whether policy committees like CYP and others would be able to review and scrutinize them first. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Would you like to start? And then I will take more questions if there are.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to members for the questions. I'll try and navigate through all of those. So starting with Councillor Bowden, in response to the question around range, first of all, my immediate response around shared service arrangements is there is no such thing as one size fits all. There is not a perfect model for shared services. So the balance has to be the one that works best effectively for us from an operational perspective. That's from my perspective, but also then has to be informed very, very clearly by the policy position of the joint administration. So I think your point around range is absolutely right. Does that mean the range cannot change in future? No, it doesn't. It actually means the range can and probably should be looked at on an ongoing basis, because opportunities may arise to either share things which we might want to consider doing politically with Peterborough, or indeed with others, or equally as part of the political commitments from the joint administration, looking at the opportunity to test whether we bring more things back in-house if that's a more affordable or sustainable option. So I think the range point is a very well made one, but there is no one size fits all. So that would be my response to Councillor Bowden on that point. On the point around procurement, actually, we have been building our in-house procurement capability within Cambridgeshire for some time now. I think we have got a team that is exceptionally hardworking, professional, and dare I say, exceptionally busy. Procurement skills are, I think you used the phrase niche or specialist, absolutely endorse that point. At this stage in the process, if I was to look at sharing procurement, my personal view is I would rather build and grow our own capacity first, improve some of the things we need to improve around procurement within our own organisation, and then assuming we might be in a stable position, we could look to explore either providing or sharing with other partners in due course. I also recognise that procurement is one of those areas that local authorities fundamentally are struggling to recruit trained professionals into. So I can see that there may be broader resilience questions we want to consider around that area in the longer term. At this moment in time, though, I'm encouraged by the team we've been able to build internally within Cambridgeshire, and obviously want to continue to support that to grow and become effective. Turning then to Councillor Howitt, if I may come on then to the next points. I think the notion of the work we're doing to differentiate, and particularly below senior levels in children's and adult social care, it was just to reaffirm that already beneath senior leadership roles in most of our services that continue to be shared, we already have a high degree of differentiation. So the vast proportion of children's social work staff are Cambridgeshire employees when they're working for Cambridgeshire. The same is true of the vast majority of our adult social care teams when they're working on behalf of Cambridgeshire. They're our employees focused wholly on us. Areas where we have some greater sharing at the moment are around social care commissioning. And that's one area we are currently looking at how we may further differentiate. And the Service Director of Commissioning is currently looking at options to separate out contract management arrangements between Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, with the intention that a business case on that would come forward. That's partly in response to the fact that his view, so I'm taking this as the professional view of the Service Director for Commissioning, his view is that we can differentiate contract management and actually ensure Cambridgeshire's market in that area is more robustly managed rather than doing that through a shared service arrangement. That's something he's been discussing with other colleagues and is due to bring forward a proposal on. Clearly that would be a change to the current shared environment, but that's very much the professional view, but also gives us a chance to have greater control over some of the contracts we already have in place in Cambridgeshire to a more tailored extent than perhaps the current arrangements enable. Beyond that, sharing with others, I was just going to make the comment that actually the paper touches on Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I would just comment to members today that regulatory services is actually a good example where we share beyond Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Some of our regulatory services are actually already shared between Rutland County Council, Peterborough City Council and ourselves. And that arrangement continues as part of the paper that's set out in front of you today. And then finally to Councillor King, I think around the senior leadership roles, particularly within children's and adult social care, and the potential for new roles. I think I was just going to reaffirm the point that we are continuing with some shared senior roles in those areas, which I've set out for the Staffing and Appeals Committee previously. And indeed, we've started the recruitment process for 2 of those key senior roles, which is currently underway nationally. Those positions would continue to be shared and would be joint between ourselves and Peterborough, and would be a joint appointment process led by our Staffing and Appeals Committee with Peterborough's Employment Committee. For other shared service arrangements below service director, so I'm being clear that the terminology service director is used because I need to align to our constitution. Shared chief officer or service director and above roles are a matter for member determination and appointment. For operational shared services matters in terms of individual teams or 1 or 2 posts, we will continue to govern that through the shared service governance group that already exists and follow the existing section 113 arrangement we have with Peterborough City Council. So those decisions would not normally be matters for committee unless they are fundamental matters of policy or fundamental matters around a wholesale change to our arrangement. So that's when I would see things coming back to strategy and resources, not on individual posts below service director level. Those would be managed through our existing operational governance arrangements and would be wholly in line with our constitution, which delegates matters around officer employment below that level to myself and to the executive director. So I would intend to continue with that arrangement. And I'm hoping, Chair, I've managed to navigate my way through all the questions from the 3 councillors concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. Very, very informative indeed. Are there any more questions for Stephen before we open it up for debate? Would anybody like to speak in the debate on this item? Yes, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. It seems like they say a week's a long time in politics, but after 13 months, that's quite a number of weeks, but it's quite a short time for the joint administration to have forgotten what their pact was based on. The pact was based on no senior level appointments to be shared with Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. That was written out as read as statement. It's fundamental to you all signing up to agree to work together. And I commend both the previous Chief Executive, Gillian Beasley, and the present Chief Executive on managing to get such a convincing U-turn from the joint administration, so much so that Councillor Howard has already brought out point 2.3, where he commends the fact that we continue in certain areas to share at senior level with Peterborough. Because the route from the terrible decision that the joint administration originally made, which was a politically driven one, to sever all ties. The reality of the situation is some things work and some things are better than others. And so Gillian asked for a the LGA to do a review of the corporate structure and of the county council before Stephen's term. And then that carried on into Stephen's term with the results coming out. And they said that the chief exec's office needed some greater capacity and have a good think about your shared services. That's basically what it said. And when you did have a good think about your shared services, you found out that some of the good things were there and some of the bad things weren't. However, unfortunately, because of the statement that you issued before you really thought things through, the immediate reaction was the dissolving of a lot of the shared arrangements. There's poor morale in staff. You're allowed to that to fester like an open wound for what is now 13 months before finally coming to the terms that you made a wrong decision, a wrong announcement back then. And this is a rescue job by the new Chief Executive, Steve Moore, of which I appreciate, and it's a good rescue job. But the resultant impact on the residents of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is a £4 million organisational change programme that concentrates its money on the most senior tiers of management. Whilst we heard from Tony Cooper and other officers throughout the organisation, you have vacancies across the organisation, you have frontline shortfalls, and you are concentrating on plugging the hole that you have left open because of your original statement, which you've now forgotten and are climbing down from. We heard more about the policy drive before this earlier on today in a bizarre attempt to subvert the action log into a policy statement about incorporating all services back into the organisation and trying to avoid any further service outsourcing whatsoever, which wasn't appropriate for that paper at that point in time. And whilst that might be a bold policy statement on behalf of the Labour Party, I'm going to urge them to do what happened over the last 13 months here and actually do some work behind the scenes before you come out with policy statements and try and find out what works and doesn't work with your chief executive who you've appointed and has done a good job here, to actually find out what does and doesn't work before you actually come out with statements that will lead to another disastrous set of multiple resignations and a poor vacancy rate. So I won't be supporting this on the basis that I don't think the Cambridgeshire residents deserve to pick up the £4 million bill for organisational change that doesn't concentrate on the front line where the real capacity issues are and instead supplements the most upper tier of management or costing more chiefs instead of more Indians. Sorry, that's probably wrong terminology these days. I take that back. But the point is, you're concentrating at the wrong end while suffering with vacancy rates at the bottom end and people suffering there. So I won't be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Is there any more points of discussion anybody would like to? Yes, Richard.
It's getting a bit tiresome where on issues where largely we agree that we hear such negative comments. I suppose the opposition feel that that's what they should do, but I think we can have a more constructive debate. Let's just not imagine history. What the joint administration agreement said was there would be a moratorium on appointments pending our review. And that's extremely clear. So we've never announced stopping all senior appointments. That was not our intention. We wanted to look at it. The second reference in terms of joint administration statements is the press release from September of last year that coincided with this committee. And so those are very clear records written down that are nothing to do with what we've just heard from the leader of the opposition. And I just put this to the opposition. Councils up and down the country are suffering recruitment difficulties at the moment. The labour market is tight and it's difficult for every council to be able to recruit the people that it's needed. I think there is no evidence that there are any members of our own staff that are suffering a morale problem because of this issue. And I think that that being said by the opposition risks creating that rather than diminishing it. And as far as I know, we've got extremely dedicated officers who are doing their absolute best, where there is a complete lack of connection between these issues and morale issues, as far as I know, in all cases. And it's about time that the opposition also thought about their responsibilities over what messages you're sending out to potential recruits that could come and be our social workers, could come and be our highways officers, could come and be our communities officers. And I hope you will not repeat that. Finally, again, don't rewrite history. It's not the main part of this debate, so I'll say it very quickly. But on the earlier point I made, which was quite properly in order because it was on the action log, it is perfectly proper to ask a question, which is what I did. And I specifically used the word some. So in terms of the Labour Party and the Labour group, let's be very, very clear here. We're simply interested in the joint administration fulfilling what we've promised to do in all respects, and in that respect too, and being mischaracterised over what we've said and why we've said it, again, that does no service whatsoever to the opposition.
Thank you, Richard. Is there any more debate on this point? I was going to read 2.6 of the joint agreement where it says a moratorium will be placed on any new senior appointments shared with Peterborough. All new senior appointments to be made for Cambridgeshire County Council only. So I think that kind of speaks for itself. Beyond that, my summing up would be there seems to be not a consensus on this paper. So we will vote on the recommendations, but you know, this is mostly points to note. So to note the development of a clear set of services, which is also what the chief executive needs for his own team. To note that formal statutory consultation is underway in relation to that, and to approve that any future strategic decisions relating to entering any new or enhanced shared services arrangements will require a formal policy decision, because that indeed is what this committee is for. So those are the recommendations. Can I please take everyone in favour? All right, Michelle. Anyone against? Any abstentions?
The result of the vote is 8 votes in favour, 6 votes against and 1 abstention. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you, members, and thank you, Stephen, very much for the update. Item 10, corporate performance report. Jules, do we have Jules? Hello, Jules. Please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. This paper reports on a number of areas relating to corporate performance. These are a summary of the performance of corporate services up to the end of Q4 21-22, progress against joint agreement actions that have been transferred to Strategy and Resources Committee oversight, resumption of performance reporting by Policy and Services Committees, progress to develop strategic key performance indicators, or SKPIs, as measures for our corporate priorities, and a proposed amendment to the performance management framework, reflecting the role of Audits and Accounts Committee. It may be helpful to highlight that there is a detailed performance information given for each corporate services KPI in Appendix 1, and a proposal to add 2 new KPIs relating to communications. Of the 20 corporate services KPIs, 3 are off target by more than 10%. These are related to contract waivers, freedom of information requests, and subject access requests, and full information on these has been provided in the appendix. All policy and service committees are on track to resume performance scrutiny by October at the latest, and 9 SKPIs are proposed relating to the children and young people and transport corporate priorities. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Jules, for joining us. Are there any questions for Jules, please? Going once, going twice. I see no questions, but please stay just in case there's anything during the debate. In terms of debate, would anybody like to make any comments, any interventions? Yes, Steve.
Yeah, this one's a question of detail. I really just want to bring out one of the major points in the paper. So apart from the fact that earlier on we asked for KPIs for decentralization work or some sort of monitoring, which was knocked down, it's a shame that's not ready yet. That was a political decision earlier not to do this paper, but it'd be nice to see some work being moved forward on that. But I want to talk about this paper on page 54, indicator 169, and the concerns I have that raised. See, it's monitored now that 90, so these are contract waivers, so a contract or a procurement exercise that's not really gone to the rule book on how we want things to happen here. And there were 90 waivers sought less than 5 days before the contracts were issued. 15 of those were over £100,000. 9 of them were for new contracts. Now, I understand Audit and Accounts have had a look at this as well, which I appreciate, because we're informed that Audit and Accounts have had a look, but we're not told what they thought about that, or whether it was just flugged under the nose, whether it was ever came to any kind of discussion point about it, or whether they had anything to say about breaches of good governance, because clearly this is a breach of good governance. At the last full council meeting, we had a paper presented by the Joint Administration that requested a watering down of the waiver rules. So this is under either the previous or the present waivering rules. It's not going very well. But I stood up at full council, and one of those particular waivers, I said, you're exposing yourself to a greater degree of risk here. But I was voted down, or the Conservatives were voted down, it was ignored. But even with that, so they're unconnected, or they may be connected, But watering down of waivers and seeing this level of waivers implemented is very, very concerning. So I've not put forward any amendments. I simply wanted to raise this with the committee, raise this with the chief executive, raise it with the team, and raise it particularly with the audit and accounts committee, as this is something that very much falls in their domain. I don't ask for an amendment, but I do ask that the chair and officers, if they can agree an action with the audits and accounts to particularly address this and any actions to deal with it, because it is a high concern. So that's all I'm saying. But the downside of this is if you don't, you actually have a risk of poor value contracts, or worse still, fraud. I'm not suggesting that's happened here. What I'm saying is if we don't nip it in the bud, that is the potential outcome. So it's just a request to have a good degree of attention paid to that element. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Steve. I will bring in Tom, who wants to answer this, but there's Chris who, would you like to, okay, Tom, would you like to come in now?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Count for raising this. As he says, this is an area that's been looked at by the Audit and Accounts Committee, picking up on some external audit recommendations that were considered last November and then forwarded on to full council. It's important as well that this committee keeps this area procurement compliance in close focus, given those recommendations. I think the council is moving in the right direction on this area, and the changes that were made to the contract procedure rules at full council that Councillor Count refers to as a watering down were in a very specific area in relation to waivers, and that is the post-award process, where the council has complied with a fully competitive process. If we have received fewer than 3 bids from the market, that previously required a waiver, and taking a view on the kind of standard approach across the sector, the decision was to take that out because the council has followed a competitive approach. I think we are seeing a high number of waivers, and at the moment, compared to where we were, that's a positive step forward, because it reflects broader awareness across the organisation of procurement compliance. We've talked already that the procurement team is relatively small and needing to kind of promote that broader compliance across contract managers across the service. And what the KPI we see here has enabled us to do is then drill down further on the individual instances that have breached those thresholds. And we've set the level at 100K because that allows us to look at a number of things above that, because of course the UK procurement thresholds, the lighter touch regime threshold and the key decision threshold are all above that. And just briefly, the committee will see at page 65, we've itemised the different individual items that breach that threshold and the further reasonings behind that. And actually, personally, I'm fairly comfortable with the individual reasons in those cases where a waiver was appropriate. Some of them relate to late notice of grant conditions. Some of them are those instances where fewer than the requisite number of bids were received, so would no longer require a waiver. And in some cases, some emergency procurement related to the pandemic, but still below the lighter touch threshold for social care. But this is a very important area for the council, and where we need to improve that compliance going forward. So I welcome the suggestions from Councillor Count.
Thank you. Steve, do you mind? I will take Graham because I think he wants to. Sorry? Okay, go ahead. Just briefly, please.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate that, Tom. That was a good response. But the one I wanted to go back to is the one at full council and explain where my concern comes from. If you're looking for, the exception breaks the rule kind of thing, it's a good way to write rules when you look at what would be the way that they would get broken. So let's assume the very worst circumstance, we have somebody employed in this organisation, God forbid, that is hell-bent on fraud. And my belief is the easiest way to commit a fraud is to go and say, I only received 1 bid, and that bid was from my mate Joe Bloggs. And because you now don't have to seek a waiver for that, because you've got less than 3, it's a real potential for fraud from somebody minded that way. And that is why I'm so concerned, because through those eyes, I see it as a weakness, and that's why I've repeated it again today. Thank you, Chair, for
No,
indulging
thank
me.
you, Stephen. Do you want to get back, or is that just, I don't know?
Just very briefly, Chair, the only thing I would add to that, and I think the committee will have heard what Councillor Count has said, but the council, of course, has a number of other procedures and mechanisms for officer declaration of interest and code of conduct, etc. So, thank you.
Yeah, that was my impression, really, that if somebody is hell-bent on fraud, there are other problems other than the wavering process. But the point is noted. I mean, I want it to be noted. Graham, in terms of the audits committee, and then Chris, I haven't forgotten you.
Yes, and I can't remember, Chris, whether you were there at the May meeting or not, but just to reassure members what Tom has said, we had an extensive discussion about procurement and the waiver issue at the Audit and Accounts Committee. We were not particularly happy either with the numbers that were coming through, and so were very asked challenging questions of internal audit and others about what was going on. We were reassured that there were actions being taken, including changes to the procurement team. And I would also like to reinforce what Tom has said about ensuring that fraud isn't occurring. I think we do have a lot of other procedures within the council, and internal audit are always on top of fraud as a major issue as well.
Thank you very much, Graham. Do you want to come in now, Chris?
Thank you. In fact, it was helpful, I think, that Graham spoke first, because I fully concur with the comments that he's just made. We have within this paper a suggested amendment to the performance management framework concerning performance affecting the council's exposure to risk. And that's fine as far as it goes, and I've got no problem with that. But I have a more fundamental issue to do with risk and the Audit and Accounts Committee. And this is not, let me be quite clear, this is not meant to be a criticism of the chair of the Audit and Accounts Committee whatsoever. This is something which I believe has been a weakness in this authority going back a number of years. So it's not to do with this administration either. This is meant to be a helpful suggestion to those who understand it from a regulatory point of view and consider. Whilst there is quite a bit of risk reporting which goes on to members within the Audit and Accounts Committee, and we do take that seriously. The chair does, I do, and other members of the committee do. So quite a bit of work is done on the risk reporting. And we also work quite well on examining the control environment and having questions concerning that. What we in this authority don't do as well as some other authorities in terms of member involvement is looking at risk management. Now, an enormous amount of work is done at officer level, at different officer levels, as far as risk management is concerned. And that's extremely valuable. And I'm not questioning the validity of all of that work which happens. But we as members don't do any significant amount of work when it comes to the analysis of the highest level of risk management. And my suggestion is, when looking at how we may change the way in which the Audit and Accounts Committee looks at the council's exposure and attitude to risk, looking at and challenging the highest level risk management which takes place would, I believe, be a very useful direction of travel for us to go in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and I would like these comments to be noted. I'm sure they are. Is there anything else from anybody? Anyone who wants to come in? If not, thank you so much, Jules and Tom and everybody else, for the information that we were given. We are being asked to review and agree the proposed additions and removals from the KPIs. We are being asked to scrutinize the performance information of the Joint Agreement Action Plan, which I believe some of it has been done. And thank you very much for that. Note the progress on the business as usual performance reporting. Agree the strategic KPIs and approve an amendment to the performance management framework. Can I please have everyone in favor? Is that unanimous? I will take it as unanimous unless anybody objects. Thank you very much indeed. Which I was going to say, it's very, very nearly 1 p.m, which means we have people on, now give me 1 second, I'll turn my page. We have people on hold. Is it 15? Oh, hang on, sorry. Sorry. I have lost my page, please bear with me. 15, there we go. So we have got people that we have asked to be free for 1 p.m. for us to do this item. So I propose we do that item now and then resume the normal business of this committee after that. That the confidentiality of that item requires us to exclude the press and public first. So I will do that now if people are happy. Thank you so much, Stephen. Sorry, no, I think it's important that we are heard, just as I say this thing of all things. Item 16, which we're about to go on to, is a confidential item. Yes, Stephen.
Sure. If you leave the broken mic, but the trouble is it's now zooming on Stephen.
Oh, thank you.
So if you leave that mic by you, it may go, I don't know.
I'm really sorry. It just seems to have frozen completely. There's nothing I can do.
Swap seats.
Oh, thank you. Shall I carry on? I do apologize you're not seeing me, but you're seeing Stephen. He's very good looking, so he'll have to do. Item 16 is a confidential item, so I propose that the press and public will be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the agenda contains exempt information under paragraphs 3 and 5 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed as it refers to information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information, and that information in respect of which a claim to legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. Can somebody please second these proposals for me? Thank you, Chris. I will take Chris. Can I please have a vote on that? Everyone in favor? Unanimous, I hope, which means we do need to stop the streaming, and we have a few minutes for that.
May I raise a point of order, please? Another authority had the benefit of utilizing this room at a previous meeting at which a confidential item or several confidential items were discussed. And it is reported that by one means or another, whether it be through the microphone systems or otherwise, but by one means or another, some of those confidential items were heard in other parts of this building. May I just ask that we assure ourselves in this particular case that we take every step necessary to ensure that what is said in here is not going to be able to be heard outside this room. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, and I will. The first thing that comes to mind is that we really do need to close those doors. We will do that and do something else as well. So brief adjournment while we sort out the technicalities. Thank you.